Chapter 127. The tourists were no longer angry. They nodded helplessly. On the way back to the city of tourists, Cunagurata rode in the front alone. Neonsith, who was following behind him, felt a chill down his spine. He wanted to stop Cunagurata several times, but he held himself back. He was able to become the general of tourists because of Cunagurata's strong support. Cunagurata suggested that Neonsith should be in charge of the treasury and trade, because he was good at financial management and accounting. However, today, he changed the decision that Cunagurata had made without consulting with Cunagurata. Based on his understanding of Cunagurata, the general who never showed mercy to those who opposed him must hate him very much. What should I do? Neonsith asked himself anxiously. He had fallen in love with the position of general and did not want to be kicked out. Cunagurata really hated Neonsith. In the past, he might have made the same choice as Neonsith, just like how he opposed Felice in the city hall. However, the failure of the battle had aroused the fear in his heart. He had woken up many times in his dreams because of the ferocious faces of the Lucarians. After this battle, he realized how vulnerable he was. War was a completely different world from politics. His political skills were completely useless on this bloody battlefield. What was more frightening was that he realized that the tourists were only outwardly strong but inwardly weak. Therefore, no matter how difficult the financial situation was, he had to maintain this employment agreement. As long as he strengthened his relationship with the military genius Devers in the next 6 months, he believed that the alliance between Turris and Amendalar would definitely be stable. However, Neonsith, the traitor, had ruined everything. Cunagurata was furious. At the end of the meeting, this idiot, who used to be a lowly employee of a big merchant, actually said to Ansatanos, "Since we're already allies, why bother with employment? It's a waste of money." What the hell did he know? How could an alliance and an employment have the same binding force on Amendalar? Didn't you see that the smart young consul of Amendalar wanted us to abandon this agreement as soon as possible? Not only did he not refute, but he also voluntarily gave up. This idiot with no political sense should not be allowed to stay in the city hall. He must be kicked out as soon as possible. Ansatanos was still angry that the Devers had rejected his request for an interview. He had been thinking about how to find a reason to come to Amendalar after the agreement was signed and learn about the situation from the other new citizens of Amendalar who had gone to Persia. Therefore, he did not notice the abnormality of the two generals in front and behind him. When the Devers returned home, they thought of a very important matter. They pondered for a long time, but they were still at a loss. Thus, he called the assists over and said, "Now, the alliance agreement with Turris is about to be signed. Preparations for the plan against Lucaria had to begin. First of all, we need to understand the current situation in the Lucaria region. Only then can we formulate the correct strategic plan and carry out targeted preparations according to the actual situation." However, the problem was that the Lucanians rarely interacted with the Turris and Amendola. It was even more impossible now, so they could only send people to investigate. However, the Greeks are definitely out of the question. The difference in appearance is too obvious. If we send those captive Lucanians, we are afraid that they will take the opportunity to escape and leak the situation here. Sigh. This is difficult. Yasi, do you have any suggestions? The assists also thought hard for a while and suddenly laughed. "Mr. Consul, you forgot about someone. I think he is quite suitable." Who is it? The Devers originally wanted to make a desperate attempt, but they did not expect the assists to really have a candidate. Izam, the son of the leader Dukya. The Devers finally remembered. In the Byzantine Empire, Izam was in Timizan's camp. At that time, the Dukya people were no longer useful, and everyone only treated him as an ordinary soldier. In addition, the morale of the soldiers was unstable, so no one cared about his movements. However, The Devers vaguely remembered that someone told him that Izam later joined his mercenary army, and he was in Hieronymus's company. Now that he thought about it, Izam was very curious, smart, and had a strong ability to learn languages. This left a certain impression on the Devers. Moreover, he also grew up in the mountains. Does he look like a Lucanian? The Devers asked uncertainly. More like. The assist said with certainty. His height and body shape are quite similar, but his hair color is slightly different. However, this can be done with makeup. Most importantly, he married a Lucanian woman as his wife, and he can learn the language and habits from his wife. Oh, just like you. The Devers relaxed after finding a suitable candidate. He joked, I didn't expect you to really marry a Lucanian girl, and she is really Bagul's sister. This time, it was the assists who was a little shy and didn't say anything. What does she look like? Don't tell me she's like her brother? The Devers asked curiously with a smile. She's okay. The assists mumbled in embarrassment for a long time before squeezing out a sentence. Okay. Then she's not bad. The Devers knew his herald better than anyone else. He said with certainty, Vespa is the leader of the entire tribe. Of course he would choose the most beautiful woman in the tribe as his wife, and his daughter would definitely not be bad. As for Bagul, he's a crooked beauty. The Devers continued to tease, but your brother-in-law is also very impressive. Even with his looks, the most beautiful woman in Amendola still can't forget him, and she's willing to wait for him for 5 years. Seeing that the assists didn't say anything and only smiled, the Devers said, Yassi, let me give you a suggestion. You'd better be understanding and tolerant, learn from your wife, and get to know the Lucanians seriously. Maybe one day, when you have enough power, I will really send you to Lucania. Master Devers, can we really take over Lucania? I heard from my wife that there are 5 to 6 main towns in Lucania City, hundreds of tribes, and a population of more than 100,000. The assists asked worriedly and doubtfully. As long as you dare to think about it, prepare carefully and plan correctly, everything is possible. The Devers encouraged him confidently. The assists was deep in thought. The Devers said, Go and call Izam here. Yes. Wait. The Devers remembered something and stopped the assists, who was about to leave the living room. I have an important task for you. I need to keep abreast of the movements of the surrounding city-states, such as Tarantum, Turii, Heraclea, Clotho, and so on. Some of the new laws and changes they have made in trade, politics, and military, as well as the situation of the people in the city-states, and so on. Someone needs to organize manpower to collect information, summarize, and report to me in time so that we can formulate corresponding laws and measures according to the situation of the neighboring states in time. You will be in charge of this in advance. If you need money and manpower, I will supply it to you. Yes, Master Devers. The assists agreed without hesitation. The Devers saw that he was very enthusiastic and reminded him, doing this kind of city-state intelligence gathering is a complicated but huge work that requires patience and meticulousness. You have no experience at the beginning, you can start from Turii. The Devers carefully told the assists about some of the principles and experience of intelligence gathering that he saw in books and on the internet in his previous life. The assists listened carefully and remembered. He was very excited because this was the first time he was in charge of a specific matter independently. It was obviously more interesting and important than being a herald who only called people and conveyed orders. Izam and his Lucanian wife were working in the field. As a Dukian mountaineer, Izam did not have the traditional Greek custom of not allowing a housewife to show her face in public. When his new wife asked to go with him to work in the fields, he not only agreed, but was also delighted. In Dukia, when there was a shortage of manpower, women had to go out hunting or even fighting with javelins. His wife took the initiative to work with him, which meant that she had already integrated into this new family, so of course Izam was happy. Although on the way to the farmland, the people of the city-state looked at them strangely, he was still in high spirits and constantly communicated with his wife in stammering Lucanian. As Izam joined the mercenary army very late, the land that he was assigned to was not very good. Not only was it only 5 acres of land, but it was also far from the river and closer to the mountains. The quality of the land was not high either. Fortunately, when he chose to be a guide for the Greeks, he expressed his desire to go out and explore the world to his strict father, Comoros. The leader of Dukia gave him a lot of money, and now he could finally put it to use. At the suggestion of a good comrade, he bought 3 slaves from Tarentum in one go. 2 Egyptian slaves were responsible for plowing the land for him, and 1 Greek slave was responsible for herding cattle and sheep for him. After all, his land was close to the mountains, which was more convenient for herding. The mountains were public property of the city of Amendolara, and anyone could go in and out to graze. However, felling of trees required the approval of the city-state's treasurer, and a certain fee was also charged according to the situation. This was a bill proposed by the Devers, and it was discussed and passed by the Senate, mainly to prevent indiscriminate cutting of trees. In fact, if it was not for Christoia opening a bank and providing loans at low interest rates, many of his comrades would have to borrow money from him. Chapter 128. Because he often went to the Devers' camp to convey the Devers' orders, many people were familiar with him. So when assists shouted from the ridge, Zam immediately dropped his farming tools and ran over. Assists looked at this unconventional Dukian and couldn't help but laugh. "Why, Zam, why are you working so hard? You even dragged your wife with you. In 2 days, we'll have our first military training. I heard that this training will be very strict, and after the training, the judge will teach everyone a very interesting game. I have to finish my farm work quickly so that I can focus on the training," Zam said as he wiped his sweat with his shirt. Assis said half-jokingly, "Not bad, you're already doing a good job. You're more like a Greek than us Greeks." Zam laughed and took Assis's words as a compliment. "It's easy to work, but it's a bit troublesome to get water. You have to waste a slave just to fetch water," he complained. "I heard that Master Devers asked Alexis to gather carpenters to discuss building a water wheel. After it's built, it'll be placed by the river. That way, the water from the Sini River can flow directly to the higher ground like yours," Assist said in a low voice, showing off a little. "Oh, there's such a magical thing. What does the water wheel look like?" Zam asked curiously. "I heard Master Devers say that it looks like a wheel. You can ask Master Devers about the specifics." Assist shrugged, indicating that he wasn't too sure. "How would I dare ask the judge? When he first became a mercenary guide, he often saw Devers. At that time, he was curious about this young man who could become the leader of a mercenary group. But as Devers led the mercenary group to victory again and again, Devers became more and more important in his heart. In addition, there were rumors in the army that he was a god's chosen one. There were even rumors that Devers were the blood of Hades. This made the more ignorant and god-worshipping Dukia's Yizam look at this young leader with awe. When he was in Byzantium, when the Devers asked the mercenaries to follow him to Greece, even though it was thousands of kilometers away from his hometown, Izam still followed without hesitation. He believed that following the Son of God was not a bad thing. "Now you have a chance. Sir Devers wants to see you," said Assists with a smile. "Really?" Izam asked in surprise. "Of course it's real. Do you think I would dare to use the name of Sir Devers to joke with you?" As soon as Assists finished speaking, Izam cheered. Without wiping his face or patting the dust, he shouted a few words to his wife in Lucanian. Then, he ran towards the direction of Amendolara. "Izam, we meet again. I heard that the Senate has given you a house and a field. You even got a wife. How are you doing? Are you used to it? Do you cry because you miss your hometown?" As soon as they met, Devers asked about Izam with concern. This made him relax. He excitedly told Devers about his experience during this period of time. Devers listened carefully and finally said, "You see, Greeks, Ducaeans, and Lucanians can live together well, like a big family, right?" "Yes, Sir Consul." Izam plucked up his courage and said, "As far as I know, many of my teammates who married Lucanian women said that they found a good wife. Even though they can't speak Greek, nor do they know how to weave, make bread, or command the slaves to work, but they are all working hard. They can even take the initiative to help their husband with the heavy work, and the way they express their feelings is very passionate. They even dare to do all kinds of things with their husband at night." Towards the end of Izam's speech, even though it was a little vulgar, Devers laughed. "Yes, we Greek women are too traditional and conservative. Both sides should learn from each other." Izam saw that Devers was so easygoing, and he became braver. He said, It's just that these Lucanian women miss their families very much. They hope that their families can regain their freedom as soon as possible." Devers's happy expression did not change. In fact, he was very happy to see such a situation happen. "Don't worry, the city doesn't have any relatives who mistreat them, and they are taking good care of them. As long as they can abide by the agreement, they will be able to regain their freedom by the time we set them. As long as they perform well, the time will be shortened. You can go back and tell your wife to tell the other Lucanian women that the city will arrange for them to meet their families after some time." "I will, Sir Consul." Izam nodded. "I called you here today to ask if you are willing to complete a mission?" Devers finally got to the point. He looked at Izam and said in a deep voice, "We need to understand the situation in Lucania City, but we have no idea what is happening there. I need someone to sneak in and gather information. Assists recommended you to me." "I am willing to go," Izam answered without hesitation. Devers did not expect him to agree so quickly. He reminded him again, "This is a very dangerous mission. It might even be life-threatening. Don't you want to reconsider?" "I am sure." Although Izam yearned for the prosperity of the outside world, the strict rules of the army always made him feel a little uncomfortable. He liked the feeling of running freely in the mountains and the excitement of quietly approaching prey. Now there was a good opportunity in front of him. "But, Sir Consul, please give me some time to prepare." "There is no hurry. You can prepare carefully. As long as you successfully return from Lucania, I will set up a mountain reconnaissance team with you as the captain. Also, after you leave, I will also ask Kristoya to pay attention to your family's situation and solve your family's difficulties at any time." Devers' promise and care made Izam grateful and excited. He said loudly, "Sir Consul, don't worry. I will successfully find out the news in Lucania and come back safely. Please keep the position of the reconnaissance team captain for me." "Okay." Devers liked confident subordinate. Setting up a reconnaissance team was something he had been thinking about for the past few days. After all, the Apennine Peninsula was mountainous, which limited the reconnaissance cavalry. A mountain reconnaissance team that could easily cross the mountains and observe the situation would be of great help to Amendola's army. Bagul was leading his people to build warehouses and hotels for Amendola. They were divided into several groups. One was responsible for cutting down trees, one for grinding stones, and one for compacting the foundation. There were more than a dozen craftsmen in the city. Some were instructing the Lucarian slaves in building the foundation, while others were doing surveys. Alexis and Heraclid were supervising the progress of the construction while looking at the blueprints. Heraclid was an apprentice of Hippodamos, the famous engineer in Greece. When he was young, he had participated in the design and construction of the city of Turin with his teacher. His biggest regret was that he could not stay in Turin. If he had, he would have been one of the first citizens of Turin. However, when he returned to Athens with his teacher, Pericles' political enemies accused his mistress, Aspasia, of taking bribes during the construction of the Parthenon. Hippodamos was somehow implicated, and his teacher was imprisoned. He was expelled from Athens and returned to his hometown in despair. In the end, the Peloponnesian War broke out, and his hometown was caught in the chaos of war. Life became difficult 20 years later. He and his wife and son escaped from his hometown, which had been occupied by Sparta. They came to the relatively peaceful mainland of Greece, to Turin, which he had once worked for. However, the current Turin was no longer the Turin that needed a large number of immigrants and talents when it was first built. The city hall refused to accept him as a citizen of the city, and the penniless Heraclid had no choice but to stay at the port. He stayed there for more than 20 years. During these 20 years, he and his son built houses for others, repaired the city walls, and made a living. He gradually gained some fame and saved some money. However, he was still a free man living under someone else's roof, living in a crowded and damp shack. He had no land and no status. At this time, he was already old, and his wife had passed away a few years ago. He did not have many requirements for life. His only regret was that his son, Heracles Jr., was still young and had completely inherited his skills. He should have had a brighter future. Just as he was worrying about his son's future day and night, a stranger walked into the simple wooden house he shared with someone else. Because it was only a few days ago, he could still clearly remember the conversation. "Who is Heracles?" "That's me." "Who are you?" "I heard that you were once an apprentice of Hippodamos, and you even built the city of Turin." "Yes, that's the truth. I never lie." "Then are you willing to accept a Mendler's employment and be responsible for supervising the construction of some projects?" "The salary will be 50 silver drachmas a month." "What kind of projects?" "I'm not too sure. When you go, a Mendler's construction manager, Alexis, will tell you. At the same time, he also told me to tell you that if you do a good job and have a talent for construction, he will recommend you to the consul Devers and let you become a citizen of a Mendler." Immediately, he could hear the people behind him talking in envy. Chapter 129. Amendolara. Heracles had once been there to help a family build a courtyard. Recently, the name of Amendolara frequently appeared in the mouths of the free people of the port of Turia. The mercenaries who had wiped out the Lucanian tribal army and won their fame had all become citizens of Amendolara. Their leader, the Devers, had even become consul. They had also turned the slaves who followed them into free people, and it was said that they would give them citizenship in the future. These days, with the resumption of trade with Amendolara, many things that happened in Amendolara recently spread among the free people of Turia. Some magical things that the lower class of Turia did not even dare to think about had happened there. The originally numb and peaceful lives of the free people and even the slaves in Tulisai were like a big, lively fish thrown into the water, stirring up the silt and sand that had been deposited under the calm surface of the water for many years. Even the experienced Heracles could not help but be tempted. Since it was an invitation from Amendolara, there should be no problem with their promise, right? Thus, Heracles asked eagerly, "Can I bring my son? His talent in construction is no less than mine." Of course, under the envious gazes of others, he and his son hurriedly packed their luggage and followed the man to Amendolara. When he saw Alexis, the first thing she said made Heracles excited. "I am Alexis, the supervisor of construction in Amendolara. I am responsible for the construction, maintenance, and supervision of all buildings in the city. There is no supervisor in any other city in Greece. This shows how much importance Amendolara places on construction. As long as you have the talent in this area, we will put you in an important position." Feeling the importance Amendolara placed on construction, Heracles' old heart began to rekindle his youthful passion for construction. Heracles' first task was to design and build warehouses and hotels. This was not difficult for him. His plan was quickly approved by the Senate. Then, He and his son led a dozen craftsmen and nearly 1,000 Lucanian slaves to start construction under the city of Amendolara. Although Heraclides was a skinny old man, he was full of energy and meticulous in his work. Every day, he would wander around the various construction sites, supervising the speed of construction and checking the quality of the project. If he found any slack in the work, he would severely criticize it. If the operation was improper, he would immediately correct it. He would even personally demonstrate it. If there was any deviation in the measurement, he would immediately retest it until it was accurate. The craftsmen and slaves were both respectful and afraid of this old man. Today, Alexis found Heraclides, handed him a roll of sandpaper, and said, "This is the next construction task, to build a road from the Cini River crossing to the city of Amendolara, and then to the Saraceno River crossing. You go ahead and make the preparations." His Excellency the Consul requested that the road be built like the one he drew. "Your Consul knows everything," Heraclides couldn't help but reply. As a craftsman who had been engaged in construction for many years, he had his own persistence and pride. What he hated most was being told by ignorant people. "Take a look at the magistrate's blueprints first," Alexis reminded him. The ignorant bystander was the only life consul of Amendola. He was the key person directly related to whether he and his son could become citizens of the city. Heraclides suddenly thought of it and broke out in a cold sweat. Decades of suffering had bent his back. He thought, as long as the magistrate's design is not too out of line, I'll just make some slight changes and do as he wants. At this moment, survival won over nobility. He unrolled the roll of sandpaper and casually glanced at it. Unexpectedly, his eyes seemed to be glued and couldn't be pulled out. Alexis saw that he was looking at it seriously and smiled. She got up and looked around. The construction site was dusty, and the craftsmen and slaves were working in full swing. He hadn't been here for 2 days, and the entire construction site had changed greatly again. This made him excited. At this speed, can it be completed in half a year? Half a year. Only 4 months will be enough. If those Lucanians are a little smarter, 3 months will be enough, Heraclides said without raising his head. Looks like you're not very satisfied with these slaves. Alexis laughed. They don't know anything about construction. I don't know how much I've talked to them, but my voice is hoarse. If I'm not satisfied, can you give me another batch? Heraclides complained. You know that's impossible. However, the Lucanians aren't as scary as I thought. Perhaps you can say that they're more afraid of you, which is why they're so obedient. Heraclides sighed. Only those who had experienced the chaos of war knew what was the most important safeguard in troubled times. These Lucanians aren't afraid of us. It's mainly because Sir Devers's method is working, Alexis exclaimed. At the mention of the Devers, Heraclides' gaze turned back to the blueprint. He pointed at the design on the paper and said seriously, "The construction of the road that Sir Consul drew is more complicated than usual. But if you think about it carefully, it makes sense. First, the dirt road is compacted, then a layer of silt, then a layer of gravel, and finally a tightly knit slate. Ditches are dug on both sides of the road, and a wall is built around the ditches. I can imagine that if this road is built, not only will it be waterproof and sandproof, but it will also be sturdy and tough. Even a cart carrying goods won't be able to damage it easily. I've never seen a road like this before. It's an amazing design. If this is your consul's idea, then he's an amazing road builder." This time, Heraclides was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Alexis was already numb to the Devers' miracles. Since Heraclides approved of the blueprint, he was relieved. He said, "So, you agree to build the road according to the blueprint?" "Of course. I also want to see what the finished road looks like as soon as possible," the wrinkled old man said excitedly. But then he pointed at a paragraph on the paper and asked doubtfully, "We all know that the mortar used for construction is made by mixing limestone with water and then adding sand. But this blueprint emphasizes that the mortar used to join the gaps between the slates is not only made of limestone mixed with water and sand, but also a certain amount of volcanic ash. Sir Consul called it mud. Is it really useful? The citizens of Amendalar all know that Sir Consul Devers is favored by Hades. This must be another inspiration from Hades. I believe that after you try it, you'll understand the magic of this thing, Alexis said seriously. You're right. How will we know if we don't try? Heraclid was interested. I remember that there are many volcanoes on Sicily and its nearby islands. Legend has it that in ancient times, it was the place where the fire god Hephaestus forged his weapons. We can send a ship to fetch a load of volcanic ash. It shouldn't cost much. Heraclid. Alexis suddenly became serious. Based on your and your son's previous performance, Sir Consul Devers proposed a motion. After the Senate of Amendalar's approval, you and little Heraclid have become probationary citizens of the city of Amendalar. During the 2-year probation period, if you perform well and continue to contribute to Amendalar, you will become official citizens of Amendalar. Congratulations! Heraclid was stunned. He moved his dry lips, but no words came out. In the blink of an eye, tears flowed down his face. Alexis was touched, and her tone softened. As a probationary citizen of Amendalar, you must know that Sir Consul Devers has repeatedly told me that the method of making cement is the highest secret of the city of Amendalar. Other than you and your son, no one else can know about it. If it is leaked, the Senate will send a censor to hold you responsible and may punish you severely. I hope you can think of a way to use it and protect its secret. Heraclid immediately became nervous. He hurriedly stuffed the blueprint into his pocket. It was the second time for the 18-year-old Arsenis to participate in military training. As a young adult, it was also the second time in his life to participate in military training. In the past, he only learned how to hold a shield and wield a spear under his father's guidance. The rest of the time, he was either learning to read or training in the arena with other friends. His life had changed dramatically since the war between Turi and the Lucanians. His father had been killed in battle, his mother had died of illness in captivity, and Arsenes, at the age of 18, had inherited the family fortune. According to the City-State Military Service Act, which was promulgated after the Devers became life consul, adult citizens of the city must participate in military training every 6 days during the busy farming season, and every 3 days during the slack farming period after the autumn harvest and before the spring sowing. Arsenes could not wait to learn the skills so that he could defeat the Lucanians and avenge his parents on the battlefield as soon as possible. But the first training was beyond his imagination. Except for the football game taught by the consul, which was very interesting, the rest of the training was not only arduous but also boring. Chapter 130. The instructor had told Arsenes that the process of fighting in war was very short. Most of the time was spent on marching and camping, so a well-trained Amendolan militia had to first adapt and learn how to march. Arsenes trusted his instructor, who was said to be a famous warrior in the army. He followed the method taught by his instructor to control his pace and regulate his breathing to conserve his strength. During the march, he also saw groups of Lucanian slaves carrying freshly cut tree trunks pass by them. In the past, he would have expressed his anger by cursing and throwing stones, but now he would not do so. On the one hand, he had adapted to the existence of these people. These slaves were the property of the city-state, and they were creating wealth for the city-state. Hurting them would not do him any good, and he would be punished instead. On the other hand, the instructor told them that this was the performance of the weak, and the real strong had to defeat their enemies on the battlefield. Arsenes wanted to be a truly strong man. The 5-kilometer armed march was over, but it was not over yet. After a short rest, the recruits began the charge training. This was a training program that Arsenes found slightly exciting. The fully armed recruits first lined up in a dense square formation, and when the drums sounded, they began to march. The drums went from slow to fast, and the recruits' speed gradually changed from a brisk walk to a jog. Finally, while running, they had to cross narrow trenches and cross ridges, so some recruits fell from time to time. The hardest part of the charge training was to maintain the formation while running. No one could stand out too much or fall too far behind, so that the square formation could rush to the target as a whole. The recruits often failed to attend to one thing and lose sight of another, and the instructor on the sidelines kept scolding them. After the charge training, the recruits' hands and feet were all sore. Guns, shields, and helmets were thrown aside, and they fell to the ground, panting. But the training was not over yet. The instructor kicked and pulled, driving the recruits to the Cisno River. The next training was swimming, which was a favorite of Arseni's and the recruits of the old citizens of Amendalar. Although Amendalar was a mountain city, there were many rivers in the territory, so the citizens all knew how to swim. Arseni's and the others cheered, quickly took off their equipment, and plunged into the water. The cool water immediately took away the heat brought by the training, washed away the sweat and dust, and eliminated physical fatigue. Arseni's and the others swam in the water for a while before coming ashore. At this time, the recruits had something to watch. Many of the arrogant veterans who looked down on them clumsily learned to swim in the river. It was a fact that the Greeks were a seafaring people, and most of them could swim. But some cities were located in the mountains and inland, and there were few rivers. Naturally, the people did not have the opportunity to learn to swim since they were young, such as Thessaly. Although the veterans were clumsy and kept choking, they still persisted in practicing. Arseni's laughed and then stopped. He remembered what the instructor had said when explaining the importance of swimming. When they were in Persia, they had to march with difficulty while fighting with the Persia. On the way, they had to pass through many mountains and rivers. Some of his comrades did not know how to swim, so they had to cross the river under the enemy's arrows. They slipped and fell into the river and drowned in vain. So in war, soldiers would encounter all kinds of unexpected situations, so it was best to learn all kinds of combat skills so that they could protect themselves and kill the enemy. At this time, a loud cheer came from the front, awakening Arseni's from his thoughts. "What's wrong?" he asked his teammate who was looking down the river. "I heard that the Archon is swimming with the Persians." The one who answered was Melisande. His father had also died in the war, and his mother, who was in her 30s, had just married the new senator of the Senate, military affairs officer Felicius. Melisande was only 16 years old, and had not reached the age to serve, but he stubbornly insisted on participating in the training. His purpose was the same as Arseni's. His adoptive father Felicius had no choice but to go to the Devers. The Devers specially allowed him to participate in the training, but he could not go to the battlefield until he was an adult. Because Arseni's was close to him and was the youngest in the camp, they became good friends. The Archon also came to swim. Arseni's was surprised. The Devers always asks others to do it, but he has to do it himself first. He is training with the veterans, so you don't usually see him. The instructor's voice sounded in his ear. Arseni's nodded and ran downstream excitedly. "Wait for me," Melisande shouted. The two of them squeezed through the crowd with all their might. Then, they saw 5 people paddling with all their might amidst the rapid beating of the drums in the river. One of them was paddling with his bare hands, his body tilting left and right. He was swimming like a big fish in a way that the two of them had never seen before, leaving the others far behind. When the drums stopped, the man stood up, the Cisno River up to his waist. He was the Archon of the Devers. Arseni's had seen him at the referendum before. At this time, the Devers smiled and said, "Who else wants to come down and compete?" The soldiers who had been cheering loudly immediately quieted down. Seeing no response, the Devers turned around and hugged the other contestants, ready to go ashore. Melisande suddenly pushed Arseni's, and Arseni's rushed out of the crowd. Facing the eyes of the crowd, he shouted in a hurry, I'll do it. The soldiers were in an uproar. It's a child. There was regret in their words. What's wrong with a child? Lord Devers is only a few years older than us. Melisande retorted. The crowd was speechless. Well said, Melisande. Ambition does not depend on age. The Devers smiled at Melisande. Because of Felicius, he recognized this young man. Then he focused his eyes on Arsenes. It is often the young who dare to challenge. Arsenes walked up to the Devers nervously. The Greeks of this era were beautiful in the nude, so they naturally swam naked. The Devers were medium-sized and well-proportioned. His eyes were particularly sharp, but at the moment they were covered by a smile on his face. The Devers was also looking at Arsenes. He smiled and said, I don't think I've seen you before. Are you a recruit? Yes, Lord Consul. My name is Arsenes, son of Aligeras. Arsenes said nervously, I may not swim as fast as you, but I am willing to compete with you. The Devers praised him loudly. As a soldier, you must have this kind of courage to fight. We, the soldiers of Amendalar, should and must have this kind of fighting spirit. When the Devers finished, the soldiers on the shore shouted in unison, Victory! 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 In such an atmosphere, Arsenes was suddenly not nervous, and his heart was full of strength. Of course, the result of the competition was that he lost. The Devers patted him on the shoulder and encouraged him. Train well, you will become a warrior. Arsenes nodded vigorously. It was strange. The Devers was only 2 years older than him, but he felt like a respectful elder talking to him. Who is your instructor? The Devers asked again. Matones. Oh, that guy. The Devers smiled. You will be happy to train under his guidance because he is very protective, but you will also feel pain because he is strict, especially for you. This last sentence made Arsenes confused. The Devers looked up and shouted to the soldiers around him, Brothers, can I swim fast? Quick! Do you want to learn? Yes. I will write down the main points of my swimming movements and add it to the training section of the military law. You will practice according to this in the future. I hope you can learn it as soon as possible. After the swim, the sun was already in the middle of the sky, and it was time to eat. Traditionally, the Greeks only ate 2 meals a day, but the Devers thought that the soldiers had trained too hard and consumed too much energy, so they had to eat at noon to complete the day's training. The soldiers took out the bread and cheese they had brought from home, while the military officer, Felicius, led his subordinates and slaves to provide each soldier with a bowl of mutton soup with meat. The money from selling the mutton was now paid from the disabled soldiers' fund in the weapon shop. In the future, the money from selling other items, except for weapons, would go to the Ministry of Military Affairs, so that the training expenses could be settled. Arsenes bit the bread and drank the steaming mutton soup, feeling his whole body gradually regaining strength. He said, Melisande, I heard the old people say, the consul is too powerful. All the laws and regulations are decided by him alone, and he doesn't give others a chance to discuss it. He wants to be a dictator. Today, it seems that the consul is quite easygoing. Melisande, who was next to him, curled his lips and said, Don't listen to those old people, they are just jealous. Because Lord Devers and the others have just become consul and senator of the Senate as soon as they became citizens of Amandara, but they have the ability. Otherwise, do you think the tourists would have begged us to sign an equal alliance agreement? It's all because of them, otherwise they would have sent messengers to condemn us. I also hope that Lord Devers can be more forceful, not like before, when the Senate discussed a matter for a long time. Look at how much Amandara has changed now. You're right. Arsenes took a big gulp of mutton soup and looked up at Melisande. It seems that you get along well with your adoptive father. Chapter 131. Like the instructor? Arsenes laughed. If that's the case, you won't be able to stay at home. Melisande, get up and go jogging. Melisande, don't eat, practice with me. Melisande, hold this stone and run 10 laps around the courtyard. Arsenis imitated Matonis's tone and said exaggeratedly, Arsenis, do you want me to tell what you just said to the instructor and see who will run 10 laps with the stone? Melisande pretended to threaten. Arsenis repeatedly begged for mercy, and Melisande finally let him go. Arsenis asked again, Are we really going to attack Lucania? Are we training so hard just to defend against Amyndalara? Melisande said disdainfully, It's a waste of our strength. Hey, do you think, Arsenis became excited, if we really conquer the land of Lucania, can I find a Lucanian woman as my wife? I've seen a lot of Lucanian wives of the new citizens these days, and they're very good. Tall and plump, and they can do heavy work. They're different from our Greek women. It's too early for you to think about this, Melisande asked in surprise. I'm not like you, with an empty house, and I'm alone. Arsenis's voice lowered. Then let's practice our killing skills together, conquer the Lucanians together, marry Lucanian women, and have a bunch of children. Melisande quickly encouraged him. Yes, let's work hard together. Arsenis and Melisande's hands clasped tightly together. After lunch, the recruits did not rest for long. Soon, Arsenis and the others were gathered again. The training in the afternoon began with practicing individual fighting technique. However, it was not a random one-on-one fight. Instead, it was a group of 3. They held a round shield in their left hand. It was supposed to be a simple and crude wooden shield made of thicker wood, but there was no time and manpower to make it, and in their right hand they held a long wooden stick that was heavier than a spear. Arsenis found that the wooden stick in his hand was thicker, and his teammates had changed from Melisande and another young teammate to 2 stronger teammates. He cast a puzzled look at the instructor who was supervising on the sidelines. Matonis looked at him and said sternly, If you want to be a warrior, then you have to train harder. Arsenis now understood what the consul meant. He didn't argue and just accepted it silently. At the start of the training, Arsenis was the first to attack. With a roar, he held the round shield in his hand and used all his strength to hit the enemy in front of him. Bang! The enemy staggered. He immediately used the wooden stick dipped in lime powder in his right hand to stab the round shield in the hands of another enemy who was hiding behind the enemy. He had to stab fast, otherwise the enemy in front of him would quickly stand firm and block his attack route. Everyone took turns to attack and block. After 10 rounds of attacks, they rested for a while and then began to stride and stab practice. That was, with a round shield and a long wooden stick in hand, they had to accurately hit the head of the human-shaped target in front of them with each step. The person whose wooden shield was hit the most would have to train twice as much. After 10 rounds of practice, they rested for a while and continued the training. It was still a group of 3, but this time the long wooden stick was replaced with a short wooden stick, the length of which was the same as the length of the saber. Arsenis' wooden stick was thicker. This time, he didn't have any doubts. The training was still to hit the round shield of the enemy in the back, but because the length of the wooden stick was much shorter, it required the attacker to use more strength to hit the enemy in front of him and occupy his position in order to stab the enemy in the back. There were also 10 rounds of practice. Then came the next round of practice, hitting the human-shaped wooden target. First of all, each recruit was required to use the wooden stick in his hand to hit the human-shaped wooden target that was assigned to him into the mud and stand straight and steady. Then, the recruits held the wooden stick and the round shield and tried their best to stab the head and face of the wooden target as if they were facing a real enemy. Sometimes they would attack its ribs, sometimes they would stab its calves, and sometimes they would slash at its popliteal fossa. Under the strict requirements of the instructor, they would step back, jump forward, and do all kinds of stabbing and slashing movements. When they were done with the training, their limbs were already sore and numb, and they could not muster up any energy. At this moment Matonis spoke, "Your performance is better than the last time. It seems like you've been practicing at home every day since you went back, so you can persevere? Yes. The recruits answered weakly. Very good. If you continue training like this, you will soon become a qualified Armendaler heavy infantry, Matones said with an encouraging smile. An encouraging smile appeared on Matones's face. We'll be adding a new training program next. You'll be returning to your companies and undergoing formation training with the veterans. Not long after Matones finished speaking, a bugle sounded in the barracks. Under Matones's urging, the recruits dressed neatly and picked up their round shields and spears. Since they had been training with thick wooden sticks that were heavier than spears, they felt as light as a feather when they switched to the spears. Arsenes remembered what Drill Master Matones said when answering the complaints of the soldiers during the first training. I let you hold a heavier stick during training, but when you are on the battlefield, you will hold a much lighter weapon in your hands. Then, you will feel more relaxed, and you will be more powerful and energetic during the battle. Arsenes also remembered that when he was young, he had watched his father participate in the city militia training. There was only one training session every few months, which was to practice marching in formation under the flag, followed by one-on-one training. The training program was simple and easy, far different from the training he was undergoing now. Not only was it difficult and complicated, but it was also gradual, just like learning to read when he was young. It seemed reasonable, demanding, and heavy. No wonder the veterans could defeat the Lucanian alliance. It was said that these training methods were from the training regulations in Armendaler's new military law, mainly written by the Consul Devers. He was really an amazing man. Arsenes and Melisande were not in the same company. Before he could say goodbye to Melisande, he hurriedly looked for the 3rd Company of the 3rd Battalion that he belonged to. According to Instructor Matones, the captain of this company was called Geogres, and he used to be a comrade in the same tent with him. He was mild-tempered. He shouldn't be stricter than Instructor Matones. Why did Arsenes think so at this moment? Because after the bugle sounded, thousands of people moved together, and the training ground was filled with dust. The only thing that could be seen was the bright red and eye-catching military flags erected high on the field. Arsenes spent a lot of time looking for them, and he became more and more anxious. Finally, he found the team he belonged to by the number on the flag. As soon as the captain, Trotitus, saw him, he said sternly, "Soldier, you're late. Considering that this is your first time, there will be no punishment for the time being. I hope there won't be a next time." Arsenes nodded and quickly returned to his position under the guidance of the captain. At this moment, a man in his 30s came over and said kindly, "I'm Tips, your captain." "Hello, Captain." Arsenes hurriedly greeted him. Tips looked him up and down, then said, "Not bad, you're a strong lad. You're a new recruit?" "Yes." "A former citizen of Amendola?" "Yes." "I guess so. Which instructor trained you?" "Matones." "What? That madman?" "Captain, you know Instructor Matones? I used to be in his company. Because of my excellent performance, the 3rd Battalion forced me to join the army. Matones didn't want to let me go, but Geogres is his good friend, so I came here and actually met you, a student of Matones. This is all the arrangement of the goddess of fortune." Tips sighed. In fact, Matones thought that he was too naggy, and when the 3rd Battalion came to ask for him, he directly recommended him. There was no need to ask him to stay. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of you," Tips said seriously. "Thank you, Captain," Arsenes said gratefully. "Tips, get ready for training. Stop talking." At this moment, Trotitus shouted from the front of the squad. "Got it," Tips replied, then muttered in a low voice, "You're lucky to be a captain. If I was the first to follow Master Devers, I would have been a captain by now." Hearing this, Arsenes felt a little strange. The soldier next to him said, "Our captain likes to nag, but he's a good person." "I hope so," Arsenes thought. Due to the high intensity of the previous training, The squad training was just for the soldiers to get familiar with each other and do small marching and jogging exercises. For the soldiers of the 1st Main Company, this kind of training was just a way to recover their strength, because they were too familiar with each other. For the 3rd Main Company, it was very necessary, because it was a new army, and the soldiers of the division were not very familiar with each other. According to the traditional military training method of the Greek city-states, the officers of the army were relatively fixed, and the soldiers were often changed. During the battle, the citizens would be summoned to the square and randomly assigned to the various squads according to order or by drawing lots. This could prevent the soldiers and officers of the same squad from sticking together and affecting the normal political order and democratic elections of the city-state. Chapter 132. The training time for the squads was not long. With the help of Septimus, Arsenes quickly integrated into the squad. Then, the squads merged into the company and went through further formation training. Arsenes and the others began to familiarize themselves with more complicated tactical instructions and flags. What rhythm of drums, what speed of marching. What bugle calls advance. What bugle calls retreat. What bugle calls charge. Also, under different drums and bugles, they had to pay attention to the direction of the squad flag. If the squad flag pointed forward, it meant that they were advancing, rushing, or charging in that direction. If the squad flag pointed backward, it meant that they were retreating, slowly retreating, or retreating in that direction. If the squad flag kept drawing circles, it meant that they were not advancing, resting, on guard, or preparing. They also had to learn how to quickly form columns into horizontal lines, to form a dense phalanx, and then quickly split the phalanx into columns to advance quickly. There were also some complicated tactical actions, such as the 2nd and 3rd squads defending the middle, and the 1st and 4th squads attacking from the flanks. Next was the combined training of the brigade. At this time, there were no complicated tactical instructions, but more about changing formations. For example, the fish scale formation, what the Devers called it, in fact, the chessboard formation in Rome, would quickly change into a compact phalanx, and then the phalanx would return to being a fish scale formation. The front row would retreat and the back row would advance, forming a new large phalanx, and the phalanx would rotate left and right while maintaining a compact formation, and so on. Finally, it was the combined training of the whole army. Not only did they have to change formations in front, but they also had to coordinate with other brigades and troops. For example, when advancing, the light infantry at the back would quickly pass through the gaps in the fish scale formation and rush to the front of the formation. They would form a line of soldiers that would throw and shoot. Then, they would quickly retreat to the rear through the gaps in the formation, and the fish scale formation would quickly merge into a large phalanx. When a sharp bugle sounded, it was a signal for the cavalry on the flanks to attack. Although there were only a dozen of them, the Devers had specially prepared a tactical space for them. The light infantry that had retreated to the rear of the phalanx, i.e., the 7th Brigade, would now quickly move to the rear of the cavalry. When the cavalry charged with their spears, the light infantry would hold their wooden shields and long swords and follow closely behind in a loose formation, while the heavy infantry phalanx would slowly press forward. There were many novel offensive and defensive methods that Arsenes had never seen before, which was an eye-opener for him. At the same time, he had a headache because of the constantly changing flag commands. But with the constant reminders from the squad leader Septimus and his comrades, Arsenes did not make any big mistakes. The same was true for the other recruits. Gradually, they were able to keep up with the pace of training. When the training ended, it was still early because it was already May and the sky darkened later. At this time, the Archon Devers walked up to the makeshift podium. The tired soldiers began to get excited. Devers went straight to the point. "Brothers, what are we going to do next?" "Football. After the last practice, are you familiar with all the rules?" "We're familiar with each other." "Hurry up and start. Then, just like last time, we'll set up 4 arenas first. It'll still be the first team from the 1st Company of the 1st Brigade versus the first team from the 1st Company of the 7th Brigade, and then the first team from the 1st Company of the 2nd Brigade versus the first team from the 1st Company of the 3rd Brigade. There will only be 4 hourglasses of time for each round. The team with the most points will be the winner, and the loser will be eliminated. The winning team will advance to the next round. When the soldiers were waiting for the consul to say the words, "Begin preparing," the Devers continued, "Now I will announce a new rule. The participating team must have 5 Lucanian slaves." The soldiers were in an uproar. Capus, Dracos, Hieronymus, and the other senior officers had already been informed by the Devers in advance. They knew that this was the consul's effort to integrate the Lucanians. No one dared to refuse the Devers' order, so Bagul and the other 40 Lucanian slaves were brought to the training ground. Originally, Bagul and the others were grinding stones, but Alexis suddenly gathered them together and pointed out the 40 people led by Bagul. She said that they were the 40 slaves with the best performance today. As a reward, they would be allowed to play football with the Duke's militia of Amendola. Because most of the Lucanians did not understand Greek, it was Bagul who acted as the translator. The slaves were restless, worried that this was a plot by the Greeks to harm the 40 people. Alexis swore to God that they would be back before nightfall. Only then did Bagul and the others were brought into the training camp uneasily and stood in front of the Greek soldiers. When most of the soldiers were at a loss for a while, Olivers, the captain of the first team of the 1st Company of the 1st Brigade, quickly made his move. He quickly picked out Bagul and the other 4 strong Lucanian slaves. Only then did the others react. In a flash, the 40 slaves were divided up by the teams participating in the first round. The Devers used a very short time to explain the rules of the game to them. Of course, it was still Bagul who acted as the translator. Then, Bagul and the other 4, who did not really understand, were added to Olivers's team. The football field was a flat grassland about 100 meters long and 50 meters wide. Every 10 meters there was a white line. In order to prevent the limestone powder from being wiped off during intense movements, there were wooden poles inserted at the intersection of the white lines on both sides. According to the Devers' requirements, the company captain could only be the coach of his team, and the team captain had to be the team's quarterback. This was because the coach had to arrange tactics according to the strengths and weaknesses of his team and the opponent, and the quarterback was the core of the team on the field. He had to change tactics according to the changes on the field and lead his team to victory. The Devers wanted to train the leadership and command ability of the team officers. He believed that in the modern competition of his previous life, football was a competition very similar to ancient cold weapons. The confrontation in the middle, the assault on the flanks. Not only could it train the strength, speed, and agility of the soldiers, it could also cultivate the unity and cooperation of the whole team. At the same time, it could also train the company captain and team captain to think calmly in the fierce competition and quickly make the correct response. This was of great benefit to the army as a whole, for the systematic, complex, multi-service, short of cavalry for the time being, composite army that Devers had created depended heavily on the abilities of the middle and lower ranking officers in order to exert its true power. First, both sides drew lots to decide the order of attack. Olivers was lucky to draw the first attack. Coach Antonios began to arrange tactics for the team. Bagul, you've just arrived and are not familiar with the game yet. Watch and learn from the field first. Bagul nodded. It seemed like they were really playing a game. The soldiers around them all looked serious, and the Lucanian slaves were infected. You guys go first. After the opponent kicks off, pay attention to receive the ball. After receiving the ball, don't hesitate and immediately pass the ball to Olivers. Olivers, you pass the ball to the big guy and let him run with the ball. Test the opponent's strength. The others pay attention to block the opponent for him. Antonios was arranging tactics for the players on the field. At this moment, the whistle sounded, and the referee, Drax, urged the players on both sides to go on the field. According to the rules, the captain was the referee, and there were 4 referees. Since Epitines, the captain of the 7th Brigade, was also the captain of the 1st Company, Leds, the captain of the cavalry, took over. The soldiers took off their helmets, greaves, swords, and all other metal clothing, only wearing linen breastplates to prevent injuries. At the same time, both sides prepared strips of linen dyed red and blue to bind their bodies tightly, so as to separate the 2 teams. There were 55 players on one side plus 5 slaves, and only 11 players were needed at one time. However, rugby was a very physically exhausting sport, and the soldiers were already a little tired from training, so they had to keep changing players to maintain combat effectiveness. At Draco's order, the game began. The hourglass also began to count down. The Epitines team kicked the ball to the opponent's half of the field and immediately rushed toward the opponent. Antonio's found that the opponent had actually sent 5 slaves at the beginning of the game. Could it be that the slaves were using their greater physical strength than the soldiers to hinder their attack? Antonio's decided to watch the game first before making any adjustments. A soldier jumped up, and as soon as he received the ball, the opponent was almost in front of him. Although he was also wearing a linen breastplate, he looked like a Lucarian. The soldier holding the ball was stunned, and he was immediately caught by the opponent. Fortunately, he fell to the ground in time and pressed the ball under his body. The players on Antonio's team sighed with regret, while the other side cheered loudly. Several players excitedly went up to the Lucanian to show encouragement. An opportunity to attack was wasted just like that. According to the rules set by the Devers, the attacking side had 3 chances. During this time, they had to advance a distance of 1 wooden pole, about 10 meters, in the opponent's half of the field. After advancing, they would get 3 more opportunities to attack. Otherwise, it would be the opponent's turn to attack. Oliver's was not in a hurry. He joked, "Xenotimus, did you exercise too much with your wife last night? Is that why your hands and feet are so weak that you can't even pass the ball?" The players laughed. "Okay, brothers, this time we must let them see the strength of the strongest team in the army." According to the rules set by the Devers in the military law, the 1 in the military code was not just a number, but also a reflection of ability and honor. The first unit was the strongest unit in the army, and so on. The first unit of the first unit was not only the strongest of the units it belonged to, but also the strongest of all the units in the army. The soldiers roared and roused their spirit. The 2 sides lined up on the marking line where the ball was stopped. The 2 sides in the middle were facing each other, and on both sides, one side was ready to receive the ball and sprint at any time, while the other side was ready to block at any time. Chapter 133. The 2 sides pushed each other as hard as they could in the middle. The soldier on Antonio's side finally got the ball and passed it back to Oliver's, who threw it with all his might at the big man on the left, Tecthenus. As Tecthenus caught the ball, he spun and dodged the opponent, who lunged at him to grab him, then charged forward with the ball in his arms. Another opponent lunged at him from the side. Xenotimus blocked the grab just in time. Tecthenus was a big man, and once he sped up, he was unstoppable. He was caught twice by his opponent, but he managed to shake him off with his powerful momentum. Seeing that he was already 2 yards away from his own half of the field, Epithenus could no longer hold back and shouted anxiously from the sidelines. At that moment, a player from the side quickly caught up and lunged with all his might, spreading his arms in the air and accurately grabbing Tecthenus' feet. Tecthenus fell to the grass like a falling pillar. Fortunately, he had the ball in his arms and did not lose it. The Epithenus players rushed up and excitedly patted the player's body. It was a Lucanian, and though he did not understand what the Greeks were saying, he sensed the gaiety and goodwill in them, and he, too, broke into a broad grin. The Lucanian in Antonio's team suddenly exclaimed, "What are they saying?" Antonio's asked Bagul. They're calling that man's name. His name is Lidum. Bagul pointed at the Lucanian player on the field. He's a famous warrior in our tribe and a very good hunter. Antonios nodded thoughtfully. Drax ran over and asked with concern, "How is it? Is something wrong?" Tegthanas struggled to his feet and took 2 steps to show that he was fine. Due to the strong physical nature of rugby and the high risk of injury, and the fact that Amendola could not make protective gear for every soldier, the Devers strictly stipulated that they could only use grabbing, pulling, and blocking to disrupt attacks. They were not allowed to hit, kick, or injure anyone else. Otherwise, they would be banned from the game. That was why the soldiers were afraid of being banned and were cautious in their attacks. At the same time, the Devers arranged for doctors to be on standby. Good. Very good. Well done. We've already advanced so much. Let's work harder and get this point. Olivers clapped his hands vigorously to encourage his teammate. At the same time, he laid out a new strategy. The game started again. Olivers got the ball and threw it to Tegtinos. Tegtinos ran 2 steps with the ball. When he saw 2 opponents charging at him, he immediately threw the ball back to Olivers. Under the protection of his teammates, Olivers threw the ball to Tegtinos again. The big guy quickly threw the ball back to Olivers. Oliver made a move to throw the ball to Tegtinos for the 3rd time, but when his opponent's attention was drawn, he suddenly leaned to the side, and with a flick of his wrist, he threw the ball to the front right side with all his might. Then, he was tackled to the ground by his opponent. Amid the exclamations of the players on the field, the football flew 20 meters in the air and was about to fly out of the end line. One of the Antonios players quickly rushed over, jumped up with all his might, and reached out to block the football. However, because the ball was too fast, he did not manage to catch it. Therefore, after landing on the ground, he quickly jumped up again, but he still did not manage to catch it firmly. The other party had already pounced on him and grabbed him. Amidst the cries of regret from the soldiers watching the game, Antonio's team lost their chance to attack. The slaves off the field also shouted loudly. "What are they talking about?" Antonios asked curiously. They said, if it were them, they would definitely be able to catch this ball. Bagul explained, "We Lucarians have been walking and hunting in the mountains since we were young. We often climb high and low. When it comes to jumping, other races may not be able to compare to us." Antonios nodded and said, "It's our turn to defend next. The 5 of you will attack together." Bagul was taken aback for a moment before he became excited. After watching off the field for a while, he felt that this game was very interesting and exciting. He had long been eager to try it. "Also, I suggest that when you go back, it's best to urge your people to learn Greek. Otherwise, you won't be able to communicate during the game." Antonios reminded with a slightly deeper meaning. The sky was getting dark. More than 800 Lucanian slaves were anxiously waiting at the construction site. Some of them were getting restless and started arguing with the soldiers who were supervising them. At this moment, the 40 slaves came back, talking and laughing. "Hey, are you guys okay?" The clansman went up to them and asked with concern. "Don't worry, we're fine." Bagul comforted them, unable to hide the excitement on his face. "Oh my, this football game invented by the Greeks is so interesting. You guys didn't see it. In the last round of the game, Bagul jumped up and caught the ball in the air. He dodged the obstruction of 2 people and directly rushed into the formation to score, helping his team win the championship." A returning slave said excitedly. "It's not rushing into the formation, it's passing the formation." Bagul corrected him. "If it wasn't for the bad teamwork of my team, we would have definitely beaten you and entered the finals." Lidum said, unconvinced. "Brother, you have to understand that your teamwork is bad because you don't understand each other. If you want to beat me next time, you must learn Greek well." Bagul warned him. Lidum thought for a moment and nodded seriously. The slaves who were waiting were confused. What game, competition, champion? Then, the returning slaves began to excitedly tell them about their experiences in the Amandalara training camp. The waiting slaves were curious at first, but later, many of them became interested in the game and secretly made up their minds. From now on, they would work harder at the construction site and strive to be selected next time to participate in this game. That sounded very interesting. From that day onwards, the progress of various projects in Amandalara advanced by leaps and bounds. For the old citizens of Lucania, it was destined to be a sleepless night. For example, Arsenius. He could not forget the fact that his parents died at the hands of the Lucanians. However, when he advanced with the ball, the Lucanians on his team blocked the opponents for him many times and scored touchdowns for him. When he excitedly hugged his Lucanian teammates, he forgot about his hatred. When he returned home and thought about it, his heart was extremely conflicted. This was the charm of modern team sports in his previous life. When an individual integrated into the team and won through unity, any hatred and conflict in the past would be eliminated by the joy of victory. This was why the Devers forced each team to have 5 Lucanian slaves. The next morning, the Devers had breakfast and were about to go out to inspect the carpenter's construction of the elevated water wheel when they saw assistants rushing in. "What happened?" the Devers asked immediately. "Cunagurata. Cunagurata has been expelled from Turii. Now he is leading his family and people to the direction of Amandalara," Assist said, panting. "What?" The Devers were shocked. It turned out that after the signing of the alliance agreement, Cunagurata sent people to investigate the financial situation of the Turii's national treasury on the grounds of the need to formulate a new trade plan to replenish the empty national treasury. While the investigation was in progress, rumors began to spread in the city of Turii. The hasty battle with the Lucanians was facilitated by Cunagurata. At that time, Felice and the mercenary leader strongly opposed it. Even the heroic Devers who saved the Turii submitted a more feasible battle plan, but they were all rejected by Cunagurata. Under his urging and coercion, the old general Felice was forced to fight. During the battle, it was Cunagurata's early escape that led to the collapse of the central phalanx, and Felice died bravely in battle. The rumors quickly spread throughout the city. Since some of the rumors were true, when the skeptical citizens went to find people to verify it, they selectively chose to believe the truth. They were the families of the Devers who had died in the battle. Their sorrow had been suppressed by the Devers' victory. Now they needed an outlet, and Cunagurata was the best target. Anger erupted among the citizens. They gathered and shouted, "Cunagurata, step down! Punish Cunagurata severely!" Slogans surrounded the city hall. Seeing that things were not going well, Cunagurata sneaked home through the back door of the city hall. However, the citizens who heard the news rushed to his house and surrounded it. Cunagurata urgently ordered his family and slaves to be on guard to prevent the citizens from rushing into his house. He stood within the walls of the house and tried to explain to the angry citizens. While both sides were in a stalemate, someone suddenly shouted, "Citizens, don't forget, after Cunagurata escaped back into the city, he forced us to close the gate. As a result, the citizens who fled could not enter the city, and more than half were killed by the Lucarians. He's a murderer!" With this reminder, many people remembered Cunagurata's neurotic shout at that time, quickly closed the city gate. In fact, this measure had saved the lives of all the people in the city during the emergency, but the angry people did not care about this at all. They only remembered that they had watched their loved ones being slaughtered like lambs on the city wall. They hated themselves for being powerless, and of course, they hated the culprit even more. Thus, an even more intense conflict occurred. The citizens wanted to force their way into Cunagurata's house. The people in the house tried their best to stop them. The angry citizens even carried a black log and finally broke through the gate. Countless frenzied citizens rushed into the house. If it was not for Cunagurata pretending to be dead and the slaves protecting him loyally, he would have been beaten to death on the spot. Chapter 134. On this day, the people looted Cunagaratta's house like a mob. One of his sons was killed, and another daughter committed suicide after being raped. Many of his clansmen and slaves were injured, and most of his belongings were taken away. The next day, the heartbroken Cunagaratta could not get out of bed because of his injuries. He asked his servant to send a letter to the city hall, expressing his willingness to resign as a general. However, the people were still angry. At the same time, they were worried that Cunagaratta would take revenge on them for what they did yesterday. So they continued to protest in front of the city hall, asking for an immediate citizens' assembly. General Dionysus and the others, reluctantly, agreed. Then, the citizens' assembly was held at noon. The first topic was that the people proposed to expel Cunagaratta. Most of the citizens agree on the pottery pieces, and the proposal was passed. Therefore, Cunagaratta, who served as the chief general for several years after the Peloponnesus War and helped Thurii, the new overlord of Greece, Sparta, and its allies, to avoid being hunted down by the new Greek overlord, Cunagaratta, was expelled from Thurii by the potsherd expulsion law invented by the people of Athens. The second topic of the citizens' assembly was to re-elect the 9 generals. In the end, Dionysus was elected as the chief general, Bucos was elected as the general because he successfully hired the Devers expeditionary force, and Ansatanos was rejected by the people because he defended Cunagaratta when the people surrounded the city hall. When Cunagaratta received the news at home, he was silent for a long time, and then let out a long sigh. According to the potsherd expulsion law, he could return to Thurii after leaving for 10 years. However, he was determined to leave this sad city. After obtaining the consent of his wife, children, and clansmen, he began to pack up in the afternoon and sold his house and fields at a very low price. During this period, only Ansatanos came to visit him once. One day later, Cunagaratta brought his family, some of his clansmen, and nearly 100 slaves who were loyal to him. They carried their bags and drove their carts out of the city. When the tourists heard the news, they rushed over, not to see Cunagaratta off, but to vent their anger. Some even threw debris at Cunagaratta and his family. His entourage lowered their heads in fear. Only Cunagaratta, who was lying on the carriage due to his injuries, remained calm in the face of the angry stares. A few years ago, he had used this method to expel the tourists of Athens. Today, he was in this predicament. He thought of the Aciculodoax family that had been expelled due to their defeat, and the Sybaris natives that had been expelled and even killed not long after the city was built. Was this Greek democracy? All of a sudden, he was puzzled, until his youngest son, Dicaeocrate, woke him up. "Father, there's Neoness." He looked in the direction of his son's finger. Neoness was standing on top of the city gate, looking down. Cunagaratta, who had been in politics for many years, knew who the real mastermind was when it happened. When their eyes met, it did not arouse any more hatred in his heart. He watched quietly until he was out of the city gate. He looked back at his motherland, where he was born and raised, with a sad look on his face. He suddenly said in a low voice, "Neoness drove the beast of the people's will to deal with me. This time, I underestimated him. But with his ability, I'm afraid he can't control this beast. Sooner or later, something bad will happen." Dicaeocrate seemed to understand and said, "Will this bad guy be driven out of Turis? Who knows?" Cunagaratta turned around and stroked his son's head. He looked at the unpredictable north and said nervously, "Let's go. As we discussed before, we'll go to Amendola first." When Cunagaratta and his people came to the Saraceno River, they saw the consul Devers of Amendola, leading a few senators and a group of guards waiting on the other side of the river. When Cunagaratta heard this, he quickly asked his slaves to drive the carriage to the front of the group. Seeing Cunagaratta lying on the carriage, the Devers said in a clear voice, "Master Cunagaratta, I'm glad you chose to come to Amendola. When we heard that you were coming, the Senate, after an emergency discussion, decided to grant you the citizenship of Amendola. Are you willing to accept it? After all, Cunagurata was only driven out of the city, but his tourist citizenship was not taken away. He could still return to Turris after 10 years. During this period, he only needed to stay in another city. Amendola might be overthinking things, but when Curagraca heard this, his slightly uneasy heart finally calmed down. He immediately expressed his gratitude to the Devers and said sincerely, "I'm very happy to become a citizen of the same city as Master Devers." His people were also relieved. Although Turris and Amendola had just signed an alliance agreement, they were afraid that Amendola would refuse to accept them due to the bad relationship between the two cities. In fact, it was precisely because of this problem that the Devers did not welcome Cunagurata with great fanfare, afraid that it would cause dissatisfaction among the old citizens. As for Cunagurata, the Devers only met him twice and did not know much about him. However, the only 2 times they met made him feel that Cunagurata's political ability was not low. From the information they received, they knew that during his tenure as chief general, Turris was able to maintain political stability and prosperity. It was a pity that due to his lack of military ability, he lost his position as chief general and was eventually driven out of Turris. However, this was exactly what the Devers wanted. From the expulsion incident, the Devers vaguely felt something, so they welcomed Cunagurata enthusiastically. On the way to Amendola, both sides avoided talking about Turris. There are still some empty houses in Amendola that you and your family can live in. However, I suggest that you buy them because the price is not high. As for your people, they can only rent them for the time being because they are not citizens of Amendola yet. The financial officer, Mercies, did not care that Cunagurata was a new guest. He introduced the place to Cunagurata as if he was a brother. Cunagurata expressed his understanding and said, "I heard that the city has recently passed an immigration law. I wonder if they meet the requirements? Can they apply to become citizens of Amendola?" Had the news started to spread in Turris? Divers was very happy to hear this news. He immediately explained in detail, "Of course they can apply. This matter is handled by the registrar Lafayas. I think there should be no problem with them being registered if they pass the review. However, according to the Immigration Act, they will need a long period of observation, usually 2 years. They will need to familiarize themselves with the laws, customs of Amendola. Only then can they become probationary citizens and enjoy some of the rights of the city. It will take another 2 to 3 years before they can become official citizens." Divers was very happy to hear this news. In other words, it will take 5 to 6 years to become an official citizen of the city of Amendola? Cunagurata was a little surprised. After all, these people had taken the initiative to leave Turris because of him. He had to be responsible for their future lives. Of course, Devers could hear his objection, so he emphasized, because according to the new law of Amendola, the official citizens of the city will be given land, so we have to be careful. Cunagurata thought he had heard wrong. He looked at Devers in surprise, but he saw that Devers looked serious and did not seem to be lying. After all, the right to distribute land to its citizens only existed when the city-state was first established. Tully's land was much larger than Amendola's. Since the city-state was established, it had never distributed land to new citizens. Amendola's city-state had a longer history than Tully's, and it had less land than Tully. How could there be extra land for new citizens? And it was even included in the city's law. Cunagurata really wanted to question Divers, but he thought that he was a newcomer, and there was no need to be serious with this young consul right from the start. It would make him feel that he was not easy to get along with. He could slowly inquire about these things in the future. So he changed the topic. "I also heard that the slaves of the city can easily become free people, and they even have the opportunity to become citizens of the city." "There is indeed such a thing, but their situation is special. If you want your slaves to become citizens of Amendola, I'm afraid it will be difficult to meet the conditions, Devers said honestly. As long as there is a chance, I will do my best to make them citizens to repay their loyalty in protecting me and my family in Turris. Cunagurata finally said something related to this matter, but his expression was calm, as if he had seen through the world. This was very different from the Cunagurata that Devers knew. Was this incident a rare lesson for him? Some people grow in setbacks, while others give up on themselves in the face of setback. If Cunagurata was the former, then it would be Amendola's fortune. Devers thought about this and sighed. These slaves are really lucky to have you as their master. Cunagurata immediately replied, with you as the consul, Amendola has undergone unprecedented changes. It is also the city's fortune. It has to change, Devers said firmly. In today's chaotic world, if you don't change, you will die, and if you change, you will survive. After listening, Cunagurata silently pondered this sentence. He walked all the way to the foot of Amendola and saw the Lucanian slaves busy at the construction site. Cunagurata stopped and looked at them for a while with a complicated expression. He said in surprise, I can't believe these Lucanians are so obedient. There are probably more than 1,000 people here, and there aren't many soldiers guarding them, but they are working so hard. Because the city didn't cut off their livelihood because of the crimes they committed. Instead, it gave them hope, Devers said meaningfully. Hope? Why do the Greeks and Lucanians have to kill each other? Why can't they live together peacefully in the same city? Seeing some gratifying changes in Cunagurata, Devers decided to reveal something in advance. Chapter 135. The other city-states believe that land is the greatest wealth, so they are unwilling to accept foreigners and free citizens. They are unwilling to share the benefits and wealth of the city-state with them. I'm the exact opposite. I believe that people are the greatest wealth of the city-state. Only with people can we grow food, create art, and create wealth. Only with people can we build weapons, build armies, and defend the city-state. Only with enough people will we be able to get enough land. Devers said in a firm tone. His words shocked Cunagurata like never before. He was smart enough to know how to get enough land. Obviously, the Devers were subtly telling him about the source of the land, for the new citizens, so he fell silent. On the other hand, Cunagurata's eldest son, Sostatus, looked at the warehouses and hotels that were almost completed and asked, I heard that you're going to attract Turii merchants and foreign merchants to store goods and stay here. Are these the warehouses and hotels under construction? Yes. I see that there are many warehouses and hotels to be built here. Is the city-state going to manage them personally? Sostatus asked again. Mercies understood what he meant and immediately said, Of course not. The city-state doesn't have that many civil servants. Everyone has their own things to do. We're going to open an auction and rent them out. Auction was a new word. The Greek's excellent merchant genes allowed Sostatus to quickly understand what was going on. He asked, Can we participate? You're very welcome, Mercies answered happily. Even though the entire family was rather tired after moving and decorating the house for most of the day, Cunagurata woke up early the next morning. Waking up early was a habit he had developed over the years. The slaves helped him dress and get up. He decided to go out for a walk with the help of the slaves before returning for breakfast. Cunagurata's house was at the foot of the mountain. After the new citizens were allocated housing, there were still many empty houses. It was obvious how much damage the war had done to Amendora. Only when Cunagurata was in the middle of it did he understand why the original citizens of Amendora were so angry at the Turii. Most of these empty houses were rented to free people at low prices, so when Cunagurata went out, he could see groups of free people hurrying to work. Their faces were brimming with energy and passion that the free people of Turii lacked. Even when they saw a stranger like Cunagurata, they would greet him in a friendly manner with a strange accent in Greek. Cunagurata knew why they were so passionate about life. After becoming free citizens from slavery, their employers even paid the so-called preparatory citizen tax to the city-state. As long as they obeyed the law and worked hard, they would become preparatory citizens of the city-state in 2 years. It was already June, and the weather was getting hot. The city of Amendora was relatively cool because it was built on a mountain. The sea and mountain breezes took turns blowing against the small city. Cunagurata walked up the road and occasionally met citizens who were going down the mountain. They were all going to work in the fields. Old citizens and new citizens alike greeted and joked with each other, appearing very harmonious. The slaves who followed them were also very spirited. They must have seen hope after the mercenary slaves became citizens. What really surprised Cunagurata was that there were women accompanying them. From the conversation, they seemed to be the wives of citizens and not the women of free citizens. In order to make a living, the wives of free citizens would often work to earn money to support their families, such as setting up stalls and working as restaurant employees. She was even prepared to accompany her husband to work in the field. He recalled that his son had mentioned some of the strange things he had seen in the city yesterday afternoon. Looking at the woman's appearance, she was indeed a Lucanian woman. If he was a traditional and conservative foreigner, he would have made a fuss. However, Cunagurata, who had been in politics for many years, first thought of the significance of this phenomenon for the city-state. Obviously, the Devers were not just talking about it. They were trying to assimilate the Lucanians in various ways. This young man had an extraordinary ambition. Under his leadership, the small city of Amendora was so strange and different, but it was rejuvenated and full of vitality in such a short time. Cunagurata's interest grew. He found that there were many people going down the mountain, but there were also many going up the mountain. Many of them were children. After asking, he found out that there were disciples of the Pythagorean school of thought teaching mathematics for free in the square. There was actually a Pythagorean school here. While Cunagurata was shocked, he suddenly remembered the scene of their first meeting, and instantly understood. This must have been Urchita's matchmaker. The Pythagorean school opposed democracy and supported aristocratic politics. How could the Devers tolerate it? However, Cunagurata changed his mind. The Devers were lifelong consul, and Amendora was not a democracy. When they arrived at the square, there were already some people surrounding the platform in front of them. On the platform, a young man was teaching basic mathematics. This young man was Mentodicus Els. Back then, he and Martichores had been promised by the Devers to go all out and accept apprentices. However, they strictly followed the traditional requirements of the Pythagorean school. The disciples must have a certain mathematical foundation, so they had to undergo a test. However, when they excitedly went door to ask, they were all rejected. First of all, most of the new citizens had a low level of education. Now that they had just been allocated land and houses, they were busy taking care of everything and had no time to take the test and learn. A few wanted to learn, thinking that they would participate in public office in the future, but when they heard that they had to pass the test first, they immediately got a headache. Although the old citizens had a higher level of education than the new citizens, on the one hand, they were busy with the funerals of their loved ones, and on the other hand, the Pythagorean school had a bad reputation in Greece. Rumors of secret associations, worship of evil gods, they worshipped number as their god, opposition to the city, and so on had long spread throughout the city. Of course, the two of them were not welcomed. After being busy for a few days, they did not manage to recruit a single disciple. The two of them were greatly discouraged and wandered around the city all day long. Inadvertently, they discovered the Hades number, actually Arabic numerals, that the Devers had taught Mercies to use for bookkeeping purposes. One had to know that the Greek scholars who studied mathematics in this era had a very troublesome problem. As the Greek characters that represented numbers were complicated to write, once the number exceeded 10,000, it was very difficult to write. This brought a lot of trouble to the scholars when they carried out mathematical calculations. On the other hand, the Hades number was simple, easy to learn, and easy to remember. It easily solved the most troublesome problem in mathematics, and it would definitely improve the efficiency of mathematics research. Most importantly, mathematics would be easier to popularize among the people. In history, the person who solved this problem for the Greeks was Archimedes, who created the method of recording large numbers. Thinking of this, the two of them felt as if they had found a treasure. However, Merces expressed his refusal to teach them the secret of using this symbol and said, "This was taught by Lord Devers. It is said that it is a gift from Pluto. You must get his permission to learn." The two of them had no choice but to look for the Devers again. They had originally thought that it would be more difficult, but Devers agreed at once. "Mathematics comes from everyday life," he said. "Of course I want everybody to be able to learn it so that they can apply it to their lives, so that they can solve their problems, so that they can make life easier. That's the real meaning of learning." The Devers' words greatly touched the two young people. Therefore, Devers suggested that they hold free public lectures on mathematics in the square and teach the basics of mathematics to the citizens of the city who were willing to come. The Senate was willing to endorse them and encourage the people to actively participate. This way, over time, they could cultivate a large number of mathematics enthusiasts for the Pythagorean school. Naturally, the Pythagorean school would also be able to take root in Amendolara. The two young and energetic disciples did not want to return to Tarentum with their tails between their legs. After thinking about it again and again, they finally decided to break the tradition of the Pythagorean school and hold public lectures. After getting their agreement, the Devers was overjoyed and immediately invited the two to participate in the design and manufacture of the water wheel. In his previous life, the Devers were a common sight in the water villages of southern China. Water wheels were everywhere and seemed like something that could be easily made. However, after the Devers asked the supervisor Alexis to lead a carpenter to try it out, they found that it was not easy. Either the support frame collapsed due to uneven forces, or the angle of the wheel's axle was different, causing the rotation to be sluggish, etc. The small water wheel was actually related to the more precise calculation of mathematics and the application of mechanics. In this era, mathematicians were often proficient in physics. Because the two were closely related, Devers had no choice but to ask the two young disciples of the Pythagorean school for help. When he took out a simple picture of the water wheel and explained its purpose, the two were instantly attracted. After careful observation, they felt that it was a perfect example of the God of mathematics helping humans to live a better life, completely ignoring that it was the Devers' idea. In addition, under the leadership of Archita, the Pythagorean school of Tarentum had been involved in the research of mathematical mechanics for a few years. It just so happened that they could apply what they had learned, so the two immediately expressed their willingness to help develop the water wheel. Today, while Mentodicus was lecturing on the stage, Martocores had already started building the water wheel by the Shinny River. Even though Mentodicus was a little anxious, he still tried his best to calm down and finished his lecture. After patiently answering the enthusiastic questions of the people, he hurried down the mountain. Chapter 136. The people watching from the sidelines cheered, while the Lucanian slaves who were involved in digging the canals and setting up the water wheel were dumbfounded, wondering if it was the work of the gods. "Lord Devers, Zeus has blessed us. This is amazing. This is great. With this water wheel, Amendolara will have an additional 300 acres of good farmland." Cornelius was excited. Not only will there be more farmland, but it will also be more convenient for the people to use water in the future. Scombres seemed very happy as well. "Everyone, this is not the blessing of Zeus. We have to thank Lord Devers for this. The water wheel was personally designed and provided by Lord Devers. If there is really a blessing from the gods, it must be Hades. Marigi's blunt words made Cornelius and the others feel slightly awkward. The Devers did not stop Marigi's rudeness, nor did he express humility. He needed to let these old citizens understand that, under his control, Amandalera would bid farewell to the past and shine brightly. The cheers of the people were in stark contrast to the discomfort of the old citizens. At this moment, the assists rushed over to tell him that Izam was back. The Devers immediately handed over the task of hosting the celebration to Cornelius. Cornelius took over the glorious task with a complicated expression. The Devers hurried back to their house with the assists. Izam was covered in dust. His face was dirty, and his long hair was unkempt. He wore a tattered Lucanian leather robe and was barefoot. Standing in front of the Devers could hardly recognize him. It turned out that when Izam returned to the city, he did not go home first. Instead, he went straight to the Devers. As a superior, the Devers could not but show some concern for Izam's zeal in his work. So he asked the slave girl to take Izam to be bathed, to have his hair cut, to trim his beard — the Greeks, unlike the Romans, wore beards — and to prepare a sumptuous lunch, over which he invited Izam to talk. Under the relaxed atmosphere created by the Devers, and after drinking a few glasses of wine, Izam gradually relaxed. "Master Devers, Izam burped and said, "I followed your orders and disguised myself. I crossed the mountain path to the west of the Subari Plains and went to Laos first. It's located at the mouth of the river known as the Are River. The city isn't big, but it's a stone city. It also has a port, so it's not too heavily guarded. I snuck in and worked at the docks, moving goods every day. That's how I got to know a few of the dock slaves. Can you guess who they are? They should be Greeks." The Devers was not surprised. The Lucanians had invaded the Turii region many times, and many Greeks had been abducted. But Izam's answer did surprise him. To be precise, they are the descendants of the Subaris people. Laos was built by the Subaris people. According to them, the Subaris people built Laos to be a transit port for Subaris to trade with Neapolis, Etruria, and Messenia. That's why Laos was very prosperous at that time. But after Subaris was destroyed, Laos had no backup, so it was quickly taken over by Nudum. "Oh, I see." The Devers was indeed surprised. He asked, "So, the original Subaris people became slaves? How many Greek slaves does Laos have now?" "I don't know how many Greek slaves there are, but when the Lucanians attacked Laos, some Greeks surrendered and joined the Lucanians. One of the leaders of Laos, Avanogus, is a descendant of these people. The tribe he leads is also the descendants of the Subaris people. The Lucanians think that they are not pure-blooded Lucanians, so they don't trust them very much. They often insult and suppress them. Although the Greek slaves despise these people, and think that it was their betrayal that led to the fall of Laos, they don't hate Avanogus too much. Most of them think that he is a good man because he often helps them." Izam drank a few more mouthfuls of wine and said excitedly, "Now the city of Laos is not stable. Because some of the Lucanians led by the great leader of Laos, Tula, only let his tribe stay and did not participate in the invasion of Turii, in order to prevent Avanogus from sharing the spoils of war. I didn't expect you to lead us to almost destroy all the Lucanians who invaded Turii. Haha! The great leader of Laos, Tula, only fled back to the city with a few dozen warriors, and Avanogus became the strongest leader in Laos. Can you guess what happened, my lord?" Izam seemed to be a little drunk and did not pay attention to his words, but the Devers did not care. He thought of something and said, "The great leader of the extortion wanted to annex Avanogus' tribe?" Izam patted the wooden chair and said, "My lord, you are so amazing. You guessed it right." He grabbed a piece of bread, tore a large piece, stuffed it into his mouth, and chewed. Assists raised his eyebrows and was about to reprimand him, but the Devers waved his hand to stop him. I heard from the slaves at the docks that Tula once invited Avenogis to a banquet. I don't know what happened, but when he came back, several of his guards were seen injured. From that day on, Avenogis hid at home and never went to the city to discuss business. When I walked around his house, there were soldiers patrolling the area with weapons in their hand. They said that Avenogis did not resist because he was observing the situation in Nudum. Nudum? The Devers listened carefully. Yes, my lord. Ism scratched his head in embarrassment and said, I was going to go north and go deep into the hinterland of Lucaria to explore, but Nudum controls the passage to the north upstream of the Ra River. It is now heavily guarded, and strangers cannot pass through. Laos was originally under Nudum's command, but this time, Nudum's warriors died in battle. I heard that Nudum's great leader, Eudora, died in our hands, and their strength has been greatly reduced. Speaking of this, Ism was a little proud. The few leaders in Nudum are busy fighting for the position of great leader, and I heard that they almost fought. As Ism spoke, he subconsciously raised his wine glass, but found that it was empty. The Devers got up and filled it for him. Ism sat still and only thanked them. The Devers did not mind and continued to listen to him. My lord, I remember that after we annihilated the main force of the Lucanian alliance, we rushed to their camp. Didn't we see that the camp had been burned to ashes and there were many corpses? At that time, everyone speculated that it was caused by internal strife among the Lucanians. I now know who did it. Who? The Devers leaned forward to express his concern. The people of Wig. My lord. My lord, Wig City is south of Laos, not too far from Laos. It is the city of the Briti. But because of the strength of the Lucanians, it was forced to join the Lucaria alliance. But because it is an outsider, it may be often bullied, so… the Briti. The Devers rubbed his chin. He knew even less about this native race that was also a neighbor of the tourists. He only knew that because of geographical reasons, they did not pose much of a threat to the tourists, but they were a big problem to the Greek city-states in the south. I heard that after the people of Wig escaped, they announced that they were leaving the Lucaria alliance. They also built walls and sent many warriors to patrol the border, blocking the passage of Laos to the south. Speaking of this, Ism raised his head and drank a few more mouthfuls of wine. You only know how to drink. After saying so much, do you have any news about the Grimentum? Assist said impatiently. Ism went to the unfamiliar Lucania alone to investigate. He suffered a lot and brought back valuable information. It's nothing to drink, but you can't just drink. Eat more fruit. It's good for your health, the Devers said with concern. Yes, Ism responded gratefully. He immediately put down the wine glass and coughed a few times. He then said in a serious tone, although I did not go to the Grimentum city to investigate, I still got some accurate information about him. Hearing this, the Devers and Assists immediately became alert. After all, the Grimentum was the main culprit of the previous war. It was also the leader of the Lucaria alliance. Its every move was related to the Devers' plan of attack. Picassus is another port city in Lucania municipality. It is a powerful city in the Lucaria alliance that is second only to the Grimentum. I heard that it is also a stone city. Ism did not mention the Grimentum first. Instead, he changed the topic to Picassus. A stone city. When the Devers heard this, his heart skipped a beat. Based on his understanding over the past half a year, the Greeks liked to build their cities with stone, while the mountain tribes mostly built their cities with wood. With the precedent of Laos and the fact that it was a port city, he could not help but suspect that Picassus was also taken from the Greeks by the Lucaria. Chapter 137. Since you said that Ninath is Picassus's man, why would he fight for the position of Grimentum's great leader? Assists asked, puzzled. Wyzam purposely kept them in suspense, and now he grinned, because Akapiru married his daughter to Ninath in order to make Picassus his ally. Therefore, Grimentum and Picassus's great leader became relatives, and Ninath became Akapiru's son-in-law. I heard that Sinsing even bribed a few leaders in Grimentum city, so that Ninath could get the support of some of the tribes in Grimentum. Luzo had no choice but to seek help from another powerful tribe in Lucania, the Union Potentia. Sinsing also asked Potentia for arbitration, but Potentia did not respond. Now both sides are gathering their troops, and the merchants and sailors say that a war could break out in Grimentum at any time to decide who is the great leader of Grimentum. Deves did not expect that a war of annihilation would not only split the Lucania Union, but also change the power structure of the Lucania region. Now, there were undercurrents everywhere, and it was a great opportunity for Amendola. "Can you draw a map of Lucania?" Devers asked urgently. Before Zam left, he had repeatedly reminded him. "Yes," Zam said with certainty. So, the three of them went to the courtyard of the house. Zam used a wooden stick to draw on the ground, and Assists stood at the side with a parchment and a pen. When Zam was done, he would draw the map on the paper. Devers looked at the map carefully while listening to Zam's explanation. He realized that the mountain road to the west of Turii did not lead directly to Laos, but between Laos and Nyutam. Laos city was at the mouth of the Ra River, guarding the land passage from Brudi to Lucania, while Brudi city's Vigo city was the barrier for Brudi to prevent Lucania from invading. Compared to Laos, Nyutam was more important to Amendola, as it guarded the passage to Lucania city to the north. Only after Amendola occupied Nyutam would Amendola have many options to further occupy Lucania city. Zam, the information you brought is very important. You have made a great contribution to the city. I've decided to set up a reconnaissance team, and you'll be the team leader. For now, there will only be 20 people. You can pick from each team, and if anyone refuses to release them, tell them to come find me. While Divers praised him, he immediately fulfilled the promise he had made before. "Thank you, Your Excellency." Zam was so excited that he almost jumped. "You should go back quickly. You haven't been home for more than 10 days. Your wife must miss you very much. By the way, there's a water wheel built by the Shini River. It can bring water to your field. You don't have to worry about carrying water anymore." "That's great." Zam was so happy that he was about to leave. "Wait." Devers stopped him and asked a slave to bring 2 large jars of wine. "Since you like wine so much, take it back and enjoy it slowly." Zam thanked them again, then carried one in each hand and happily went home. "Your Excellency, this kid is too rude." Assists was dissatisfied with Zam's behavior in the living room. "He's still a Dukya." Devers smiled. "Yasi, don't pay too much attention to these superficial things. The key is here and here." Devers pointed to his chest and head and said, Zam has completed the task I gave him. It's not easy. He's a talented young man. As long as he's talented and not a bad person, we should use him, right?" "Yes, Your Excellency. Now that you know the situation in Lucania city, how should we attack it? Go back and think about it. Come back tomorrow and we'll discuss it." After breakfast, Cunagurata suddenly felt uncomfortable in his chest. He had to let a slave help him to go to the hospital in Amendola. The hospital was also located in the lower part of Amendola, because it was a mountain city. There were upper and lower levels, near the city gate. It was said that in order to support the development of the hospital, the Archon Devers specially approved 2 empty houses next to each other for helps and the others to establish the hospital. Cunagurata had heard of the excellent medical skills of the Devers mercenary doctors in Turin, but when he arrived at the hospital, he was shocked by the scene in front of him. There were hundreds of patients lining up from the gate to the foot of the mountain. It even affected the entrance and exit of the city. The people of Amendola saw a business opportunity. They set up stalls near the hospital, selling food, water, wooden chairs, hats, and so on. It actually formed a small and lively market. Censor Antonios had reported this to the Devers. Other than sending more patrols to maintain order, the Devers could do nothing for the time being. He could only order Supervisor Alexis to build a large hospital next to the warehouse hotel and move the hospital out to restore traffic in the city. The loyal slave had to first rent a wooden chair and let Kunigurata sit down. He went to find the doctor to see if he could be given priority. Unexpectedly, when he reached the door, he was stopped by the patrol who was in charge of maintaining order. After knowing the situation, he expressed his helplessness and said, "There are many patients here who are more serious than your master. They also line up here in order. Unless their lives are in danger, they can only line up outside." The slave had no choice but to take a number plate and return to Kunigurata's side. Unexpectedly, other than the people of Amendora, the patients of Amendora Hospital mainly came from Tulii and Heraclea. The Tulii among the patients recognized Kunigurata, who was sitting next to him, and began to shout insults at him. For a moment the scene was a little chaotic, and even the sentries at the city gate were attracted. Kunigurata was filled with anger. He simply did not see the doctor and went straight home. However, at night, he began to feel a slight pain in his chest and did not sleep well that night. He had no choice but to rush to the hospital the next morning, only to find that the entrance of the hospital was deserted. He asked the nurse in charge and found out that the Devers would be giving a lecture to the doctors in the morning. In order to let them focus on their study and discussion, they would not be seeing patients that day. As the lectures of the doctors were not as public as those of the disciples of the Pythagorean school, it was only open to the doctors and nurses. Therefore, Kunigurata could not enter and could only blame it on his bad luck. When he returned home at noon, not only did Kunigurata feel a pain in his chest, but he also had difficulty breathing. He could not get out of bed. His son, Sostatus, had no choice but to force his way into the hall of the doctors. The Devers, who were watching the doctors having a heated discussion and exchanging their views on treatment, were shocked when they heard this. They immediately sent helps to Kunigurata's house to treat him. Helps asked about Kunigurata's condition in detail and did a physical examination. In the end, he concluded that Kunigurata's ribs had been fractured after he was beaten up, but it was not treated. After coming to Amendora, he did not rest well and went hiking, causing his sternum to be fractured. The fractured ribs pierced his lungs and caused Kunigurata's current condition. With the diagnosis, helps treated him. Kunigurata's condition began to improve, and he praised Helps's excellent medical skills. At this time, the Devers in the hospital discovered some problems with the newly established hospital through Kunigurata's difficulty in seeing a doctor. First of all, although the hospital's reputation had spread and brought about some economic benefits, it was harder for Amendora citizens to see a doctor because there were more foreign patients. This should not be the case, as it did not reflect the sense of superiority of Amendora citizens. Fortunately, they discovered this in time. Otherwise, as time passed, the citizens would accumulate resentment, and this resentment would be vented on the Devers. After all, he was the one who initiated the establishment of the hospital, and he was the nominal teacher of the doctors. Therefore, it was necessary to establish a special channel for Amendora citizens in the hospital. Regardless of the severity of the illness, Amendora citizens had to be treated first. Priority treatment. This was to let the patients of other cities see the privileges of being a citizen of Amendora, and let them know the happiness of being a citizen of Amendora. Secondly, during the medical lectures, doctors had to stay in the hospital to deal with emergency patients. Furthermore, the medical lectures could not be too frequent, lest it affect the normal diagnosis and treatment. Thirdly, regarding the problem of having too many patients to see in a day, the Devers felt that it was actually a good thing, as it could increase the income of the hotels and other industries in Amendora. However, the hospital's reputation would indeed be affected if serious patients could not be treated in time. The best and only solution was to increase the number of doctors. There were currently 6 doctors in Amendola Hospital, and it took time to train a good doctor, excluding witch doctors and wandering doctors. It was impossible for Amendola to train a new doctor in such a short period of time, so they could only poach doctors from other city-states. As the reputation of the hospital continued to expand, doctors from other cities would naturally be attracted to learn from them. Therefore, they could pass a proposal in the Senate that the hospital would accept the foreign doctors who were willing to stay in Amendola as official students. They would have access to all medical theories, medical records, and research content, and the city would immediately grant them Amendola citizenship. They could also consider extending this citizenship to the teachers. Doctors and teachers were both high-quality talents in this era, and they were indispensable for the survival and development of a city. However, Amendola lacked both, especially teachers. Chapter 138. A few days later, Cunagurata, who was recuperating in bed, heard something. Some of the slaves in the Turii stone mine had rioted, defeated the guards guarding them, and escaped from Turii. Some of the slaves even fled to Amendola to ask for protection, and the Turii emissaries arrived shortly after, asking Amendola to send the slaves back. At this moment, in the Senate of Amendola, the Turii emissary and the representative of the escaped slaves were glaring at each other. It was the new Turii general. If Cunagurata was here, he would definitely recognize him as one of the main instigators who incited the Turii to expel him. At this moment, he faced the senators of Amendola and loudly rebuked, "Amendola is an ally of Turii. Is this how you treat an emissary of an ally? Letting a lowly slave stand together with a noble Turii general is an insult to the Turii. If Amendola does not respond kindly to the Turii's request, the Turii will reconsider their alliance with Amendola." As soon as this was said, the senators sitting on the wooden chairs in the hall were in an uproar. At this moment the censor, Antonios, stood up and said, "Dear Turii emissary, we have yet to discuss the Turii's request. I didn't expect you to take the initiative to walk to the center of the hall as soon as you entered. I forgot to remind you that your seat is here." Antonios pointed to a seat at the side of the hall. "I think the noble emissary from Turii should know the diplomatic etiquette of the city-state better than us. Without permission, foreign emissaries should remain silent." The senators roared with laughter. Plazinas wasn't embarrassed at all. He pointed at the slave and continued to say loudly, "I've never heard of a slave being allowed to sit in when a city-state is discussing a major issue. The Senate of the city of Amendola is such a sacred place. How could it be desecrated by a lowly slave? This is because, as the representative of the slaves who escaped to Amendola, his request concerns Amendola and Turii. I think it is necessary to ask him to state his request again, so that we, the nobles, can have a fair discussion and judge whether his request is reasonable or not. Well then, esteemed Turii emissary, are you prepared to stand there and prevent us from starting our meeting?" Devers, who was sitting in the middle of the hall, spoke in a calm and dignified tone, causing Pleasanath to sulkily sit in his seat. "Slave, you can now state your request," the rotating chairman of the Senate, the city's governor, Cornelis, said loudly. The slave respectfully saluted and said, "Respected lords, my name is Aristocrati. First of all, I want to say that I was not born lowly. My father was a nobleman from Cyrenaica, who mainly dealt in Sylphian grass. He had hundreds of slaves and a large farm. 8 years ago, my father took me to the Olympia to watch the games. During the voyage, we encountered pirates. My father was killed. I was sold to Turii." Aristocrati took a deep breath and suppressed the surging sadness in his heart. He continued, "Although I encountered misfortune, I did not complain too much. Perhaps it was the punishment of the gods. In Turii, I did my best to complete the tasks given by my master and never slacked. Until 2 months ago, when the city-state gathered us and brought us to the mercenary camp. My lord, you stood in front of us and called us to fight for Turii." Aristocrati respectfully saluted the Devers again. You also said, as long as we win, we will be free. For freedom, we, who had never held a weapon before, picked up a weapon. For freedom, we, who had never killed before, fought against the ferocious Lucanians. It was these ferocious Lucanians who defeated Turii, but freedom made us fearless. We fought bravely, and when we won the war, there were more than 2,000 slaves left. Aristocrati gently sniffled, causing the new citizens to fall into a trance. It was as if they were in the midst of a fierce battle with a slim chance of survival. We waited for the exciting moment to come, but what we got was cold swords and spears. Turii was saved, and we were brought back to the dark and damp mine to continue carrying the heavy ore. We protested, but what we received was only beatings and fasting. Just as we were in despair, we heard a piece of news. The mercenaries and slaves who had fought alongside us had now become free citizens, and they might even become citizens of the city in the future. Why did the same slaves, who fought for Turii, end up with two completely different outcomes? Unwilling to give up, we attacked the guards of the mine and escaped here. I want to ask you, my lord, is the oath you made in the name of the gods still valid? Aristocrati's emotional narration moved the elders present, and for a moment, the hall was silent. Only Plesinus shouted, "He's lying. They are not the slaves who participated in the battle at all." Antonios immediately stood up and said, "As for whether they are slaves who participated in the battle, we have a way to verify this question. Because the free people of the city-state have fought with them for a night and a day, they are more familiar with them. I have asked them to go to the slave prison to identify them, and I request to let the representatives of the free people enter the Senate to testify." Agreed. Agreed. The elders agreed, and Pliasinus's objections were completely drowned out. Taking advantage of this free time, the Devers looked with interest at Aristocrati, who had a thick beard, a few scars on his face, dark skin, and a somewhat stooped figure, and asked, "What you asked me just now, I will answer you in a moment. From what you said just now, it seems like you have received a good education. Why did you become a mining slave?" A well-educated slave like Aristocrati would usually fetch a high price, and he would never be too wasteful to do the dirty and hard work that only ordinary slaves would do. Aristocrati smiled bitterly. "I was bought by a wealthy Turii merchant to help him manage his vineyard and winery. I did a good job and won his trust. He even said that he would give me freedom. Unfortunately, he died of illness. His wife soon married again, and my new master gave me to the city-state of Turii for free. At that time, the city-state was lacking mining slaves, so they took me. There must be some complicated inside story behind this, but seeing Aristocrati's calm face, it was obvious that he had already gotten over it." Divers said in admiration, "I don't think the gods are punishing you, but training you." When Aristocrati heard this, he suddenly became excited. It was obvious that he had heard something from the Devers' words. At this moment, the representatives of the free people entered the hall. After swearing to the gods, they gave the answer. These escaped slaves had indeed participated in the battle. Plesinus did not accept this. He stood up and retorted, "It is common for a city-state to let slaves participate in battles. For example, Sparta often let helots fight with them, and they won countless victories. Did Sparta let helots free? Obviously not. Based on the many years of friendship between Turii and Amendalar, as well as the busy trade during this period, I don't think the Devers would make such a promise. This slave is obviously lying. Returning lost property to the owner is a virtue of the Greeks. I once again request the Senate of Amendalar to return these slaves that originally belonged to Turii to Turii." Aristocrati's expression changed slightly, and he looked at the Devers. Divers, on the other hand, looked at the arrogant and tough Plesinus and sneered in his heart. This Turii man was actually threatening me and Amendalara in a subtle way. He stood up and said to Aristocrati with a serious expression, "What you asked me just now, I can answer you. I am the Devers. Amendalar is the life consul, and the promise I made is like the raging fire of hell that will never be extinguished. That's right, I promise to give you freedom after the battle is won. Because you are Turii slaves, I asked Buckos to be my witness, and I asked him to write my promise on a piece of paper and rush back to the Turii city for the generals to sign. Before the battle started, when Buckos came to persuade us to return, I once again reiterated my promise to Buckos, but I did not expect that you are still shackled to this day. The Devers's expression was sorrowful, and he said loudly, You saved Turii, Turii owes you. You helped the mercenaries, Amendalar owes you too. I ask the Turii emissaries, please give them freedom. As soon as the Devers's voice fell, the senators shouted in unison, Give them freedom. Since you have sworn to God, you should give these poor and respectable slaves freedom, Turii. Plesinus looked flustered, and he said shamelessly, Turii has never seen an agreement to give them freedom. I have never seen it either. Lord Devers, you must have remembered wrongly. Yes, you must have remembered wrongly. Chapter 139. The Devers took out a roll of sandpaper from his pocket and sneered, The tourists are really forgetful. Fortunately, I still have one here. As he spoke, he handed the roll over. The senators passed it around and saw that the Devers had promised to give freedom to the slave. There was also the signature of Buckos as a witness, as well as the signatures of the two tourist generals, Cunagurata and Niances. At that time, in order to prevent the mercenaries from leaving the Zubari plain and hold the camp, the tourist generals tried their best to agree to any conditions. Based on their experience, it would be difficult for the mercenaries to hold the camp for a long time. As long as they could whittle down the Lucanians, they would do so. Losing more than 2,000 slaves was like throwing a meat bun at a dog. They did not expect the mercenaries to take the initiative to attack the enemy and even win. Now that Niances, who was known for his meticulousness, was in power, of course, he would not be willing to turn more than 1,000 slaves into free people. There was another important point. If these slaves were turned into free people, what about the other miners? They would definitely have some ideas. Don't forget that there were 8,000 to 9,000 slaves mining. If there was a commotion, with the current number of tourists, it would be difficult to deal with it. Not to mention that there were still a group of free people at the port who were still arguing with the tourists about their citizenship. So when the roll was passed to Plesinus, he did not even look at it. He bit the bullet and tore the roll into pieces with his hands. This is fake. This is fake. This shameless act immediately angered everyone present. The hot-tempered Scambras was the first to rush over. He grabbed Plesinus and gave him a punch, cursing, I told you to tear it! I told you to tear it! Untrustworthy tourists! Tourists who should go to hell! 1 punch, 2 punches. If the others did not pull Scambras away in time, Plesinus would have lost his mind. At this moment, he shouted in fear, Murder! Murder! Is Amendalar going to war with the tourists? Get him out of Amendalar! Don't forget to give him the silver coins that were supposed to be used to redeem the slaves who escaped to Amendalar. That way, Tullidge won't accuse us of stealing their property, Divers said in disgust. Yes, Mercis replied with a bitter face. However, we might not have enough money. Devers thought for a moment and said, Then let's write an IOU in the name of the Senate of Amendola. We'll pay it back when we have the money. But if that's the case, I'm afraid that the other slaves who participated in the war will run to Amandara. Cornelius reminded. Then let them come. They helped us win the war against the Lucanians and paid with their blood and lives. By the just Hades, I hope that we can fulfill our oath to him, the Devers said solemnly. The tourists have it easy. Mercies said indignantly. The gods will always punish those who break their oath, the Devers said calmly. He turned to Aristocratic, who was shocked by the scene just now, and said, Now you are free. You can go wherever you want. Aristocratic did not expect the result they wanted to get so quickly. He was so excited that his body trembled. "Thank you, sir. We are willing to stay in Amendalar and I'm willing to repay the money that Amendalar paid for our freedom." Devers looked at him. Seeing his sincerity, he nodded with approval. "Good." When Plazinas returned to the Turris, he naturally spread the news of Amendalar's evil deeds to incite the anger of the people. Amendalar, of course, had their own countermeasures. They used the mouths of the Turris patients who came to Amendalar to spread the news of what happened in the Senate among the Turris. For a moment, the Turris could not tell the truth of the two versions of the story. However, the Turris City Hall quickly took action. They strongly demanded that Amendalar return the fugitive slaves immediately. Otherwise, Amendalar would break the alliance, and the Turris would not sit idly by. Amendalar refused in the Senate and reminded the Turris that they should fulfill the promise they made in the beginning and give the Turris benefactors, the slaves who participated in the war, freedom. The Turris then announced that the people of the city were forbidden to go to Amendalar. Foreign merchants who went to Amendalar would be charged a heavy tax when they came to Turris to trade. Since Amendalar's warehouse was not built yet, there were almost no merchants who went to Amendalar. Instead, there were many foreign patients, which had little impact on Amendalar's already negligible trade. However, Amendalar still took action. They arranged for the military training of the citizen soldiers to be held by the Saraceno River. It was a big event, and it made the Turris and slaves who farmed on the Sabari plain nervous. Other than protesting to Amendalar, the Turris City Hall did not take any further action. Suddenly, there was silence on both sides. The Devers did not want to ruin the relationship with the Turris, but he had to make a choice. If he chose Turris, it would be beneficial to his future plan to attack Lucania, but he would have to break the promise he had made before. If he chose to free the slaves, he would fulfill his promise, but he might jeopardize the alliance with the Turris. The Devers believed that if he broke the alliance with the Turris, he could make up for it in the future. However, if he broke the promise, it would leave a bad impression on the Greeks, even if it was only for the slaves. Keeping his promise was related to his integrity, but it was also related to the integrity of Amendalar. That was because many of the new laws that Amendalar enacted now relied on the trust of the people and outsiders to be implemented. They had to believe that Amendalar would keep its promises no matter what. That was the foundation of Amendalar's establishment. Just when the relationship between Amendalar and the Turris was in a stalemate, a guest came to the city of Turris, the messenger of Crotone. At the end of June, the Senate of Amendalar held a meeting to discuss holding a selection competition to select athletes to participate in the Isthmian Games, which would be held the following summer after the Olympia. This was one of the 4 most famous games in the Panhellenic world. Although it was not as old as the Olympia, it was still highly regarded. The Devers and the Senate hoped that the athletes would show the new Amendalar to the Greek city-state. The Devers even considered going to Corinth with the selected athletes, because Corinth was the site of the Isthmian Games. In his previous life, he had neither the money nor the time to watch the Olympic Games live, but in this era, he could be a VIP and enjoy the most authentic classic games. Just when the senators were discussing how to hold the selection competition, a shocking news came. Something big had happened in the city of Turris. It turned out that the messenger of Crotone had come to Turris to denounce them. He claimed that Turris had violated the agreement they signed with Crotone by building a city on the site of Sybaris. Neonsith and the others quickly explained, because of the Lucanians' attack, Turris had no choice but to let the mercenaries build a temporary camp there, which they quickly withdrew. But the messenger of Crotone refused to accept this reason, insisting that Turris had violated the agreement. If they did not want to cause serious consequences to the relationship between the two countries, they must pay compensation for their actions. In fact, the real reason why the messenger wanted to denounce Turris was that after the war between Crotone and the Briti ended, their national treasury had consumed a lot of money and resources. Someone in the city-state council made such a suggestion. Moreover, the power of Turris had greatly weakened, so the people of Crotone believed that Turris would not risk offending a powerful country like Crotone and reject Crotone's request. At most, they would argue over the amount of compensation, but that would be negotiable. So the messenger of Crotone came up with a huge list of compensation. When the generals of Turris saw the list, they immediately understood. Crotone was not here to denounce them, but to blackmail them. Suddenly, the generals started arguing, especially after Neonsith became the chief general. Although he looked at the problem more comprehensively, his calculative nature did not change. He did not care about his relationship with Amendola, but he did not want thousands of city-state slaves to become free people. Naturally, he was not willing to accept Crotone's blackmail. So he said to the messenger, "The Turris Council needs to discuss this matter together before we can give Crotone an answer." After the messenger left, he immediately asked Plazinas to secretly inform the people of this matter and incite them to protest at the hotel where the messenger was staying. Neonsith's purpose was, first, to let the messenger see the anger and determination of the people of Turris, creating conditions for the next negotiation. Second, even if the compensation agreement was signed in the future, it would reduce the people's criticism of the city hall. Neonsith's plan was very clever, but he never expected that after the expulsion of Cunigarata, the people of Turris had become even crazier and more irrational. Moreover, under the influence of people with ulterior motives, it was not something that Plazinas could control. These people with ulterior motives were the descendants of the people of Sybaris. 100 years ago, Crotone defeated Sybaris and destroyed the city. After a few years, the people of Sybaris who lost their homes rebuilt the city and soon made it prosperous again. When Crotone knew about this, he once again sent troops to attack Sybaris and completely destroyed the city. The exiled people of Sybaris had no choice but to seek help from the Greek city-states. Finally, Pericles of Athens responded to their request and called on all Greeks to rebuild Sybaris. Therefore, the elites of Athens and immigrants from all over the country swarmed to the city and built Turris on the Sabari plain. However, not long after, the people of Sybaris had a conflict with the people of Athens and other immigrants because the people of Sybaris wanted the people of Turris to become the Turris of Sybaris. Of course, this was not accepted by the other immigrants. In the end, there was a bloody conflict and the people of Sybaris were expelled. However, the people of Sybaris were after all the local tyrants, so a small number of them secretly stayed behind. In the hearts of these people, Crotone was the enemy who destroyed their home and reduced them to this state. They passed on this hatred, and when the opportunity presented itself, the descendants of the people of Sybaris would not let it go. Chapter 140. After an urgent discussion with the council, the panicking generals decided to send an emissary to Crotone to apologize and was willing to pay any compensation. When the news reached Amendola, the Devers and elders were shocked. After all, the emissary represented the city itself. Killing an emissary was taboo because it could mean war. Amendola immediately cancelled his plan to participate in the Isthmian tournament and began to pay close attention to the development of the situation. "Father, it's great. The tourists are going to be punished by the gods." So Status ran into the backyard excitedly. Cunigarata, who was lying on his bed and recovering from his injuries in the sun, was not as excited as his eldest son. The former chief general of Turi had a worried look on his face as he lamented, "I've said it before. I told you that Neancius would harm the Turris." When the Turris emissary rushed to Crotone, the generals of Crotone had already received the news through the merchant ships. They listened to the emissary coldly and ignored the Turris' offer of any compensation. They only said, "We can go to Turris and take as much as we want." Crotone had tolerated the Turris for a long time. Since the defeat of Sybaris 100 years ago, Crotone's power had been growing day by day and had become a major power in Greece. However, due to the power of Athens, they had to allow the tourists to build a city. This was undoubtedly a great humiliation for Crotone, who was used to being domineering in southern Italy. After this incident, they could settle old and new debts together and make up for the emptiness of the national treasury. It was killing two birds with one stone. On the same day, the Crotone Assembly successfully passed a resolution to declare war on the tourists and mobilized the citizens for war. On the morning of the third day, 7,000 strong militiamen were gathered. Asprostum and Silatina also sent 3,000 militiamen to join them. Trine had just experienced a war and faced the Briti directly, so they only sent 30 cavalrymen. Corunna also expressed its willingness to join the war but was politely rejected by Crotone. To the south of Corunna was the Rockley alliance. Rockley and Crotone had been enemies for a long time. Corunna was an important barrier to the south of Crotone and could not be lost. 4 days later, after offering sacrifices at the temple of Apollo in Crotone and receiving good fortune by divination, Melentius, one of the 10 generals, led 10,000 troops and marched toward the Crotone. The war finally broke out between Crotone and Turis. After receiving the news that Crotone's army was marching towards Tulii, Niansus was extremely anxious. Under the reminder of his colleagues, he proposed to the council to hold an emergency meeting. But when they heard that the army of 10,000 troops of Crotone, Nisius, Niansius, and Niansius, Crotone, Nisius. At the meeting, he spoke passionately about the failure of the Turis's attempt at peace and told them the echo of the Crotone, which immediately aroused the indignation of many citizens. One must know that although Crotone's troops were lesser than the Lucania tribes, they were genuine Greek heavy infantry. Furthermore, Crotone's militia had always been known for their fighting prowess. Although the number of Crotone's army was smaller than that of the Lucanian alliance, it was a real Greek heavy infantry, and the militia of Crotone had always been known for their strong fighting ability. At this time, Polyphes, the owner of the vineyard, shouted, "We should send another messenger to ask for peace from Crotone and agree to any of their demands." Polyphes, the general, stood up and said, "We can't come up with more money, unless we impose an extra special war tax on the citizens." Hearing that there was a tax, the meeting fell into silence again. In the end, the citizens, who had been devastated by the war and were already afraid of war, compromised. They reluctantly said that in order to avoid another war in Turis, they would agree to the tax request of the town hall, but they were afraid that even this would not be enough to satisfy the appetite of Crotone. "We have to try it first." Polyphes raised his arms and shouted, "Money can be earned back, but it's too late to regret when you lose your loved ones." The motion was approved, and Niansius breathed a sigh of relief. "Why don't we go to Tarentum and ask it to help us negotiate with Crotone?" Since Tarentum advocated the establishment of the Greek Defense Alliance, it must not want war between the cities. Another person stood up and said, "And with Tarentum's strength, Crotone will definitely be hesitant, and a truce is more likely." "That's a good idea, Enanilus," Niansius praised. As the owner of the largest shipyard in Turis, Enanilus was not someone who could be easily offended, so Niansius nodded and said, "Thank you for reminding me, we will immediately send someone to Tarentum to ask for help. Even if there is a possibility of a truce, we have to be prepared for failure. If Crotone insists on fighting, what should we do?" Another person stood up and said. Niansius looked and saw that it was Ansitanos who was speaking. Although their relationship was strained because of Cunigarata, Niansius had to admit that Ansitanos's suggestion was very reasonable. So Niansius asked, "Dear Ansitanos, do you have any good suggestions? First of all, let our citizens be armed. Crotone has a large number of people, and we can't fight them head-on outside the city. The tall city wall will help us resist their attacks and wear down their morale." Many citizens agreed with Ansitanos's words. Yes, Turris's defense is strong, and the Lucanians couldn't do anything to us outside the city twice, and the same goes for Crotone. Ansitanos continued, secondly, Amendalar is our ally, and everyone knows how strong their soldiers are. We should ask for help from them. At the mention of Amendalar, Neancius felt as if he had swallowed a fly, but the people in the meeting all agreed. Ansitanos is right. We should ask for help from them. With them around, we can be at ease. I've already said that it's not worth it to ruin our relationship with Amendalar for a few slaves. I'm afraid it's not that easy to ask for help from them now. Neancius's face turned green and white when he heard these words. He was extremely embarrassed. He forced himself to be alert and said, "This is a good suggestion. Berks, you make the trip." Berks, who had always been mild-tempered, immediately refused. "I can't do it. Let the more capable Plesinus go." Hearing this, Plesinus lowered his head and did not speak. He knew that if he went, not only would he fail to ask for help, but he might also be beaten up. It was no wonder that Berks did not cooperate. He had urged the city hall to fulfill their promise and give freedom to the slaves. The city hall ignored his proposal, which led to a slave riot. Some of the slaves escaped to Amendalar. At this time, Berks, who was a general, thought that Amendalar would definitely refuse the request of the Turris. It would be better to fulfill their promise and give freedom to the slaves. This would also be a way to get on Amendalar's good side. Not only did Neancius and the other generals reject his proposal, but they also thought that with his relationship with the Devers, it would be difficult for him to ask for slaves from Amendalar. That was why they sent the tough Plesinus. What Borkos had just said was one of the exact words that Neancith had said when he rejected Borkos's request to go to Amendalara. Now, Borkos had used the exact same words against Neancith. One could only imagine the look on Neancith's face. At this moment, even though Neancius hated Berks, he could not help but beg, "Berks, this is a matter of life and death for the Turris. Other than you, no one else can complete this task. I hope you can go to Amendalar and ask the Devers to send reinforcements." Berks let out a sigh of relief. Under the pleas of the citizens, he simply nodded in agreement. Amendalar is a small city. There shouldn't be too many reinforcements. We still have to rely on ourselves. Ansitanos continued, "I suggest that we mobilize the free people to join the war and promise them citizenship. Of course, we have already made a promise before, but we did not fulfill it. This time, in order to gain their trust, as long as they agree to join the war, we will immediately give them citizenship." Ansitanos's suggestions made Neancius feel uncomfortable. Not only him, but the citizens who attended the meeting did not agree to this suggestion due to their personal interests. In the end, the answer that Ansitanos got was, "Let's discuss this again." While the Turris were holding the meeting, the Crotone army had marched for more than half a day and arrived outside the city of Cremissa. Cremissa was originally a colonial city of Sybaris. After Sybaris fell, it turned to the Crotone alliance. After the reconstruction of Turris in Athens, the agreement reached with the Crotone specifically mentioned that Castellan and Cremissa must remain neutral. Now, in front of the Crotone army, Cremissa did not hesitate to open the door to welcome them. It even took the initiative to send 1,000 people to join the Crotone army. Chapter 141. ACI, you've collected a lot of information on Crotone's commander, Melancius. Well done. The Devers praised. It's mainly because he's so famous in Crotone. As soon as our people arrived at the port, they could hear about him everywhere. The assist said truthfully. The Devers nodded. I can see that this Melancius is a proud man. In such a battle that concerns the survival of the city-state, why would they send him as the commander of the army? The assists replied, maybe because Melancius has never lost a battle before. Besides, he's brave in battle and likes to attack quickly. Crotone must want to settle the battle with the Turris as soon as possible. They've also sent the older and more stable Timaras as their adjutant. I believe that will make Melancius more stable. Your analysis makes sense. The Devers pondered and asked, what are the characteristics of Crotone's citizen soldiers in battle? Crotone's citizens are passionate about sports and have produced many famous athletes. In every 4 major games, there are always Crotone athletes who win the championship, especially in wrestling, boxing, and discus. Therefore, the citizens of several city-states have responded that their citizen soldiers are strong, aggressive, and agile in battle. The Devers rubbed his chin. In other words, their individual combat strength is very strong. What about their team? Do they often conduct military training? The assists laughed. Sir, not every city-state trains as frequently as Amendola, and the training is so intense. The time that the people of Crotone spend in the training field is much less than the time that they spend in the arena. Looks like you're not satisfied with our training. The Devers laughed too. How can that be? I love training the most, especially rugby. The assists immediately defended himself. Isn't rugby a sport? The Devers continued to pursue. After a burst of laughter, the assists asked, Sir, will the war between Crotone and the Turris affect us? It's impossible not to be affected. The Devers sighed. A weak neighbor is much safer than a new, powerful neighbor. At a critical moment, Amendola might have to help the Turris. The stupid Turris are always doing stupid things. It seems that the plan to attack Lucania will have to be postponed again. Sigh, things are really unpredictable. Buckos rushed to Amendola and asked the Devers for reinforcements. In the Senate, the senators had a heated debate. In general, the old senators such as Cornelis and Raphaelas were not in favor of sending reinforcements. They believed that the Turris brought the Crotone army on themselves. Moreover, Amendola and the Turris were in an alliance in name, but in reality, the alliance was broken. There was no need for Amendola to offend a powerful city-state for a neighbor who kept giving it trouble. Moreover, the army sent by the Crotone looked very powerful. Even if the Turris joined forces with Amendola, the possibility of them defeating the Crotone was very small. The new senators such as Capus and Helos believed that the Crotone was currently powerful. Amendola should wait and see and make a decision based on the changes in the situation. The new senators such as Alexis and Antonios had a different view. They felt that Turris must be protected to ensure the safety of the surrounding environment of Amendola. The walls of the Turris city were high and thick. Amendola did not have to fight at all. All it had to do was help the Turris defend the city. As long as the Crotone attack was stopped, the Crotone would have to retreat in less than a month. After all, the food consumption of tens of thousands of soldiers per day was not a small amount. Alexis and Antonio's words were reserved, but Epicthenes said loudly without hesitation, "We would rather have the weak Turris as our neighbor than the powerful Crotone. That would make us uneasy day and night, unless Amendola joins the Crotone alliance. But are you willing?" If the Turris emissary Buckos heard this, he would probably be ashamed. However, Buckos was arranged to wait in the side hall of the Senate for the final decision. Epicthenes' words moved the senators, but after discussing for so long, the final decision was still made by the Devers. The Devers looked around and said solemnly, "You have all analyzed the situation very clearly, so I don't have to go into detail. What I want to say is that we have signed an alliance treaty with the Turris. This is a sacred treaty that was signed under the gaze of the gods. Previously, we mocked the Turris for going back on their word. Now that a greater danger is coming, can we keep our promise?" The Devers paused. Seeing that some were ashamed and some were deep in thought, he raised his voice again and said, "Of course we can. We will prove to all the city-states in Greece that as an ancient city-state with a long history, Amendola will uphold its promise no matter what difficulties it faces. It will protect the glory and traditions passed down by ancient heroes like Hercules, Theseus, and Aegialus." When the Devers found Buckos, they announced the Senate's decision. Amendola has decided to abide by the previous agreement and send reinforcements. Bucco's eyes were filled with tears. As the area north of Cremissa was flooded with rivers, swamps, and tidal flats, the march of the Crotone army was slowed down. It took them a day to reach Castellan. This city, which had once attached itself to the Crotone alliance after Sybaris was destroyed, also did not resist. Instead, it opened its gates wide and welcomed Melantius into the city. In the city of Castellan, he saw the Turris and Tarentum emissaries waiting there. In the face of the Turris emissaries' pleas, he did not even have the patience to listen to them. He said impatiently, "The Crotone's saber has been unsheathed, and it will not be retracted until blood is spilled." Melantius showed a little respect for the Tarentum emissaries, but he asked in return, "If a city-state violates the agreement and kills the Tarentum emissaries, what will the Tarentum do? Can some compensation in exchange for Tarentum's lost dignity?" The Tarentum emissary was speechless for a moment. Melantius looked at him disdainfully and said with a firm expression, "So the Turris will definitely be punished." When night fell, the general of Tarentum was about to go to bed. A guard hurriedly came to report, "General, there are 2 people outside who want to see you. They say they have important information about the Turris to trade with you." Important information about the Turris? Melantius was interested. "Bring them in quickly." 2 men dressed like sailors were escorted by the guards into Melantius's bedroom, cowering. "Tell me, what important information do you want to trade with me?" Melantius supported his head with one hand and lay on his side on the bed. He looked at the 2 men disdainfully. "If it's really valuable, I will consider your request." The 2 men looked at each other. One of them made up his mind and whispered, "Dear General, I am a free man of the Turris." Following the words of the sailor, Melantius's eyes became brighter. He turned over and sat up, his face full of excitement. Although the Devers agreed to send reinforcements, they did not immediately summon the troops. After all, it was the Turris who asked for help. If Amendola rushed to help immediately, the world would only laugh at the naivety of the Devers. He agreed first to stabilize the morale of the Turris army and people, so that the Turris could be motivated to fight against the Crotone. However, he wanted to wait and see. First, he wanted to observe the battle between the 2 sides and understand the Crotone army. Second, reinforcements could only appear when the Turris needed it the most. Only then could he reduce the casualties of Amendola's soldiers, gain the gratitude of the Turris, and increase the chance of defeating the Crotone. After all, Amendola was not far from the Turris. It was only half a day's journey on foot. Amendola's response made Neonces breathe a sigh of relief. At this time, his heart was full of gratitude for Amendola, and he also felt a little remorseful for his extreme actions. When the Turris heard the news, their low morale began to rise, and they all praised Amendola. However, the constant news from the south made them anxious again. Crotone's army only took 2 days to reach Castellan. Cremissa and Castellan did not resist and took the initiative to welcome them. They even strengthened Crotone's army. More importantly, Crotone rejected Turris and Tarentum's request for peace. The bad news frightened Neonces. He cursed Crotone, Cremissa, and Castellan in his heart. At the same time, he sent Berks to Amendola to urge them to send reinforcements as soon as possible. At the same time, he ordered the citizens to reorganize their armaments and strengthen their defenses. He even began to consider if he should carry out Ansitanos's suggestion and mobilize the free people to join the war. However, when the next day came, Crotone's army stationed outside Castellan did not move forward. They even sent someone to chase back the Turris's messenger, indicating that the peace request could be discussed. When the news reached Turris, the generals and the people were relieved. They then looked forward to the messenger bringing back the good news of a truce. In the afternoon, Melantius announced that the Turris's messenger was not sincere in agreeing to Crotone's request. In fact, It was Melanchus who asked too much and refused to budge, and announced that the negotiations had broken down. He expelled the Turris's messenger and immediately ordered the army that had been prepared to march towards Turris. Chapter 142. The signal to attack rang through the skies above the city of Turin. The freedmen and slaves gathered at the docks in the north and south of the city received the signal and immediately rose in revolt. They took out their hidden weapons and attacked the defenders. The south of the city was located on the south bank of the Crati River. Initially, the citizens who went to the plains south of the Crati River would work late into the night. It was dangerous to cross the river at night, so they built some thatched huts to spend the night. Later on, it gradually developed into a village. Due to the occasional Briti crossing the mountains to plunder livestock and kill citizens, the city walls were built for safety. As a result, the south of the city was not large and there were not many guards. It was only in the past 2 days that they increased the number of guards. However, due to the false news of the truce, they let down their guard. The attacks of the freedmen left them panicked and unable to defend themselves. The Crotone soldiers crossed the moat and set up siege ladders without being attacked. They quickly occupied the top of the city, lowered the drawbridge, and opened the city gates. The Crotone army surged in and dispersed the defenders. They boarded ferries, cargo ships, and merchant ships in an orderly manner. The freedmen served as sailors and quickly sailed towards the north of the city. When the Turin generals heard that the Crotone army was approaching the city, before they could give the order, they heard the news of the freedmen rioting at the docks of the north and south of the city. All of them panicked. They hurriedly gathered the citizens to go to the docks to suppress the free citizens. The elderly over the age of 50 and the youths over the age of 14 all put on their armor and picked up shields and spears. To them, this was a crucial moment of life and death for Tully. Every citizen had to stand up and protect their home. Even though it took some time to gather the citizens, everyone was united against a common enemy. The freedmen, who lacked weapons and equipment, were forced to retreat. But at that moment the Crotone army disembarked. Once they disembarked, they charged straight at the Turin army. The line of the freedmen that was almost scattered quickly stabilized. Both sides fought on the narrow streets of the port. Even though Crotone soldiers continued to disembark and outnumbered the Turin citizens, they were unable to spread out in the narrow alleys. Even though Crotone's soldiers were tall and sturdy, the Tully soldiers were mixed with the elderly and youths, and even the generals were on the field. Behind them, there were a few hundred Tully women shouting and cheering for their loved ones. It was a solemn and stirring cry. Crotone was fighting, while Turin was fighting with his life, so the battle was in a stalemate. Melanchus, who had always been at the front, was dragged behind because the ferry he was on was leaking. When he arrived at the dock, it was already full of boats, and he finally found an empty spot to go ashore. Seeing that the battle was at a stalemate, he immediately ordered the demolition of the buildings on both sides of the alley. When the Crotone soldiers began to outflank them from both sides, the Turii were gradually losing ground. They held on for a while longer and finally retreated as their citizens were killed and wounded. Neansus did not want to escape. Instead, he faced the swarm of enemies head-on. Ever since he took office, this general, who was born as a commoner, had always been well received by the citizens with his down-to-earth style and diligent work attitude. However, less than 2 months after he reached the pinnacle of the highest position in the city, Turi suffered a great disaster. He died in shame under the spears of Crotone's soldiers, while Polixus and the other generals turned around and fled for their lives. Buccos and Plazinas led some citizens, women, and children to retreat to the Acropolis on the hillside behind the city. There was the Temple of Apollo, the altar of goddess Hera, and the holy fire had been burning for 41 years since it was built. It was the place where the spirit of the Turris citizens was sustained, the place where their souls rested, the holy place. The Turris decided to make their last stand here. After Melanchus occupied and pacified the other districts, it was already late. He ordered the soldiers to light torches and surround the Acropolis of Tyrus. Then, he asked Polixus to send a message. Surrender immediately, or he will burn the Acropolis of Tyrus. Bucos and the others did not expect the Crotone to be so ruthless. After all, Apollo was also the protector of the Crotone city. After a painful choice, they opened the gate. At this point, the Crotone had completely occupied the city of Tyrus. When the news reached the Tyrus, Devers was watching the citizens' military training in the training camp. When he learned that Tyrus had fallen, he and his officers were shocked. "I really did not expect that Tyrus would fall just like that," Helos said emotionally. "If it wasn't for the fact that the Tyrus didn't handle the conflict between the free people and the slaves well, they wouldn't have let the Crotone win so easily." Amyntas was obviously not convinced by the Crotone's achievement. But the general of the Crotone is not simple either. Even with the help of the free people, he was able to use tricks to deceive the Tyrus, and then launch a sudden attack. The Crotone soldiers were also well trained to be able to take down the city of Tyrus in less than 5 hours. Devers analyzed rationally. The army of the Crotone can be said to be one of the strongest enemies we have encountered so far, apart from the 800 Sparta warriors led by Kelesopes. "We must be vigilant," Devers warned the crowd. "But we are not afraid of him," Amyntas shouted, unconvinced. "That's right, we must have this spirit. We take our enemies seriously, but we are not afraid of them. We are willing to fight any enemy." Devers encouraged the crowd. "Commander," in the camp, Devers asked the crowd to call him by his military title, not his administrative title. "What should we do next?" Alexis asked. "What do you think?" Devers asked. Alexis thought for a moment and said, "Send more scouts to monitor the movements of the Crotone army, and strengthen the defense of Amendolara." "Very well, we will wait and see," said Devers. Even though the Crotone had taken over Tyrus and displayed their strength, the Devers were happy to see that none of his officers offered to show goodwill to the Crotone. Looking at the soldiers who were actively training on the training ground, thinking about the Crotone army that was ravaging the city of Tyrus, the Devers were not afraid. At the same time, in the city of Tyrus, Melancius did not restrain his soldiers after taking over the city, allowing the soldiers to run amok in the city, robbing property, injuring people, and even raping women. The people of Tyrus were miserable. Melcius had his eyes on the most luxurious house. After chasing the owner away, he moved in himself and held a banquet with the officers under him to celebrate their victory. As he was drinking to his heart's content, he heard the prostitute in his arms say that there was a disciple of the historian Herodotus in Tyrus. He was immediately interested and asked the guards to invite this person over. When Ansitanos arrived, he saw a group of Crotone men lying on the reclining chairs in the hall, drinking wine and chewing on delicacies, with beautiful women in their arms. Most of those who took the initiative to smile and flirt were high-class prostitutes, while those who pretended to be happy were mostly Tyrus women. Some of the Crotone men were loudly boasting about the victory and flattering Melancius. Some were telling vulgar jokes where the poor and stupid protagonists were Tyrus. Some only cared about groping and doing shameful things with the women in their arms in public. Amidst the laughter and flirting, Ansitanos stepped on the marble floor that was dripping with wine and entered the hall with a straight face. "Oh, the Tyrus historian is here." Melancius drank a lot, but his mind was still clear. He patted the plump chest of the woman in his arms and said, "Go get him a glass of wine." The woman handed the wine to Ansitanos, and he took a sip without hesitation. "Tyrus, are you drinking to celebrate our victory?" An officer took the opportunity to mock him with a smile. "No, I'm just reminiscing about Sybaris, the city-state that was once famous for its wine in Greece. Back then, it was powerful, and Crotone was weak, just like today's Crotone and Tyrus, but the strong bullied the weak and eventually died," Ansitanos said calmly. "Ha, ha, ha." Melancius laughed. "Unfortunately, it was the weak Crotone that destroyed the strong Sybaris." Today, the weak Turris is occupied by the strong Crotone. You're wrong. With the gods above, no matter how powerful a city-state is, it can't escape destruction in the end, Ansatanos replied forcefully. Maybe one day, ugh. Melantius burped and said disapprovingly, but you and I may not have the chance to see it. He then sat up and said loudly, I heard that you're the disciple of Herodotus. If you write history in the future, will you include my name and this glorious victory for future generations to know? No, only the crimes and scandals you committed in Turris. Ansatanos replied coldly. How dare you? Do you want to die, Turris? When the officers heard this, they all cursed angrily. Some even threw food at him. Melantius waved his hand and ignored Ansatanos's provocation. Instead, he raised his glass and said proudly, the victor proves his strength with his actions, and the loser can only prove his weakness with his excuses. This is the maxim of athletes. The ancient heroes would only enjoy the joy of conquering Troy. No one would care about the pain of the conquered, the Trojans. They have to admit defeat, just like Lucania. At this point, he suddenly thought of something and asked, I heard that the consul of Amendola, Devers, used 6,000 men to annihilate 10,000 of the Lucanian alliance army. Is this true? Is it fake? Is it Tarentum's credit? Or is it really his credit? It's indeed the battle that he planned and organized, Ansatanos answered truthfully. It seems that this Devers is quite a character. I wonder who's more powerful, me or him? Melantius looked eager. Chapter 143. So what? Melantius glanced at him sideways. His face was slightly flushed from the alcohol, and he looked unconvinced. Where he and I were born is the arrangement of fate. Of course, he is destined to fail. He asked loudly again, Turin and Amendola are allies. I heard that when my army approached Turin, Amendola promised to send reinforcements, right? That's true. Amendola's messenger once said, as long as they are given a few days to gather their troops, when their reinforcements arrive, Turin will definitely be able to hold. Ansatanos replied. He emphasized Amendola's original words, and Melantius' face turned even redder. Melantius turned to Timoris beside him. Tomorrow, send someone to question Amendola. Why is he making an enemy of Crotone? Ask them to immediately dissolve their alliance with Turin and form an alliance with us. Timoris hesitated. Amendola and Tarentum are allies. That's right. They are allies with Tarentum. If they can form an alliance with Turin, why can't they form an alliance with us? Melantius said forcefully. All right, Timoris reluctantly agreed. Melantius swirled his wine-glass, his eyes gleaming. Devers, what will you do? The news of Crotone's capture of Turin quickly spread throughout Greece, and Turin immediately became the focus of attention. Tarentum, Rockley, Lygum, and other city-states paid close attention to the development of the situation. Even Syracuse, who was preparing troops and supplies to attack Carthage in Sicily, focused their attention on the situation. After all, Rockley was an ally of Syracuse. Dionysius even married Doris, the sister of the current chief general of Rockley's famous family. Rockley and Crotone were mortal enemies. Crotone's strength was not what Rockley and Syracuse wanted to see. Besides, this was related to a long-term strategic plan in Dionysius's mind. Crotone's emissary came to Amendola with Melantius' order for Amendola to surrender. This caused the political atmosphere in Amendola to become tense. There was a heated debate in the Senate. Cornelis, Raphael, and Strompoli believed that Crotone was coming with a great victory and was powerful enough that Amendola, which had just experienced a war, could not stop him. In order to prevent their territory from being destroyed again, they could temporarily compromise and agree to Crotone's request. The more stubborn Scambras, Tritodemus, and Protesilaus suggested that they could stall for time and request Tarentum to test the pressure on Crotone, depending on the situation. Almost all of the new citizen senators were hardliners. They had long been angered by the arrogant behavior of Crotone's emissary after entering the city. They firmly stated that Amendeleur must not succumb to Crotone's threat. If Crotone sent troops to invade, they would definitely let him know how powerful Amendeleur was. Devers had expected such a thing to happen after Crotone's army occupied Turii. As a leader who relied on military prestige to become a mercenary leader and military strength to become Amendeleur's lifetime consul, he could not show any weakness or give in, because that would shake his power. So he said resolutely, "Since Amendeleur has already made a decision, we must stick to it until the end. Don't shake Tarentum's trust in us. We can't let the Greeks think that Amendeleur is a city-state that will succumb to power and forget justice for the sake of profit." Devers's forceful words drew an end to the Senate meeting. When the Crotone emissary received Amendeleur's reply, he was stunned at first, then he threatened fiercely, "Aren't you afraid of what happened to Turii?" "You can try," Devers replied coldly. The emissary who returned resentfully brought the Devers's reply, "Dear Commander of Crotone, the people of Amendeleur revere your victory. However, abiding by the covenant signed in the name of God is a centuries-old tradition of Amendeleur. I hope you can understand." Melancius was so angry that he laughed after reading it. He tore the letter into pieces. "This Amendeleur's consul is quite courageous. Ha! A mercenary actually knows how to keep his promise?" He paced back and forth in the hall and made up his mind. "It seems that we need to teach this disobedient little country a lesson. Timorous, go gather 8,000 people, we will go to Amendeleur." Timorous hurriedly said, "But Tarentum—" Melancius waved his hand, "Don't worry, I won't do anything rash." After the Crotone army left the city, they quickly marched north. The scouts of Amendeleur immediately reported back. When the people of Amendeleur received the news, they immediately became nervous. Cornelis, Raphias, and the others once again suggested to the Devers that they should temporarily give in to the Crotone and join their alliance. However, the Devers retorted, "I've never had the habit of being forced to make peace with a knife or a gun." The new citizen senators, on the other hand, were full of fighting spirit. They clamored to mobilize their troops and give the arrogant Crotone a head-on blow, but were forcefully suppressed by the Devers. He ordered everyone to return to the city and prepare for defense. Due to his authority, the officers had no choice but to accept the order and leave. The Senate of Tarentum also paid close attention to the movements of the Crotone army. They received the news a little later than Amendeleur, and the consul immediately held an emergency meeting with the senators. The senators expressed that the Crotone ignored Amendeleur's alliance with Tarentum and brazenly invaded. This was contempt for Tarentum. They must seriously protest. However, most people expressed caution about whether Tarentum would participate in the war between the Crotone army and Amendeleur, saying that it would depend on the development of the situation. After all, Tarentum and Crotone were both powerful states in Greece, and each had a group of allies. Once a war broke out, it would not be resolved in a few battles. Archita took the initiative in the Senate to request to see the commander of the Crotone army, Melancius, and was finally approved. Tarentum sent another emissary to Crotone by ship. The sailing time was short, and with the wind, it would only take half a day to reach Crotone. While the Senate of Tarentum was still discussing, Melancius had already led the army across the Savicello River. 2 hours later, he arrived at the foot of the mountain. He looked at Amendeleur, which was located on a small hill. The walls were full of heavily armed soldiers. Under the direct illumination of the eastern sun, it looked like a glowing wall blinding people. He could not help but say, "The soldiers of Amendeleur are quite decent. If I really attacked it in the morning, the sunlight alone would make my soldiers suffer." He ordered the troops to line up in a square formation. The formation was more than a mile long. As they slowly approached the city walls, They knocked on their round shields and let out battle cries that shook the heavens. However, the soldiers of Amendalar only stood quietly at the top of the city under the strict orders of the team officers. Arsenis could not help but say, "Captain, the people of Crotone are too arrogant. We should at least roar a few times and fight back." Captain Tippus scolded in a low voice, "Shut up, this is the order of the consul. Do you want to violate military discipline?" Hearing this, Arsenis immediately stopped complaining. "Anyway, remember, as long as the people of Crotone don't attack, we will watch their performance. As long as they dare to attack," Tippus reminded. "Understood." Arsenis clenched the spear in his hand. Even though the enemy's troops looked unusually large, Arsenis actually hoped that they would attack so that he could use the skills he had painstakingly trained during this period of time. Seeing that there was no response from the people of Amendalar, Melancius immediately stopped the advancing troops and sent someone to shout at the bottom of the city, asking to see the consul Devers of Amendalar. Unexpectedly, there was no response from the top of the city walls. Melancius thought that the Devers were afraid and did not dare to talk to him directly, so he simply sent some soldiers to scold them at the bottom of the city. The Devers are cowards. They don't dare to face the army of Crotone. When the people of Amendalar see the army of Crotone, they don't even dare to breathe. When the new soldiers heard this, their faces turned red and they began to complain. Then, they were scolded by the veterans. "Whether they are cowards or not, we will only know after we fight. What's the point of just talking?" As for the consul, when he led us to defeat the people of Persia time and time again, these people of Clotho's wife were probably still enjoying the cheers of the audience in the stadium. In fact, these veterans were also holding back their anger. However, they were experienced and used to listening to the orders of the Devers. At the same time, they were also unwilling to waste their energy on unnecessary things. The voices of the soldiers of Crotone also became hoarse, but the people of Amendalar still did not respond. Melancius was also bored. He finally ordered, "Burn down all these houses as a warning to the people of Amendalar." The people of Amendalar who remained silent made Melancius feel humiliated and angry. He ordered all the warehouses and hotels at the foot of Amendalar mountain that were about to be completed were burned in a raging fire. The efforts of the people of Amendalar over the past few months were destroyed. The fire that soared into the sky reflected the angry faces of countless soldiers on the city wall. Their eyes were wide open, and they glared at the people of Crotone as they swaggered away. When the news reached the Senate, everyone was furious. Only the Devers looked calm. He carefully listened to the performance of the Crotone army at the bottom of the city by the assists who had rushed back. From this, he deduced Melancius's character and mentality, and confirmed it with what he knew. "Are the people of Crotone declaring war on us by doing this?" Raphael asked in surprise. Chapter 144. The Crotone are already bullying us. Why don't the soldiers teach them a lesson? Strompoli, who had wanted to compromise with the Crotone before, was now furious. "The soldiers have obeyed Sir Devers's orders and guarded the city, but they can't wait to eat the flesh of the Crotone raw." Amintas vented his anger at the Devers. "Sir Consul, are we just going to watch the Crotone behave atrociously on our land?" Scombras roared unwillingly. "Of course not." The Devers answered resolutely, his eyes flashing with a strange light. "The reason we pull back our fists is so that we can hit them better. The Crotone's army is stronger than ours, that's a fact. So we have to wait, just like in boxing. A brilliant boxer always defends first, waiting for the opponent to reveal a flaw before delivering a fatal blow." Everyone in the hall was shocked. By the time Archita came ashore in Turiae, Melancius had already returned to the city. Archita represented Tarentum to lodge a serious protest. Melancius said disapprovingly, "Crotone has no ill intentions towards Amendalara. I just wanted to go out and greet this young consul, who is said to be able to defeat many with fewer." I didn't expect him to be so cowardly that he doesn't even dare to come out and meet me." Archita breathed a sigh of relief for the time being, then threw down a harsh sentence. "If Crotone goes to war with Armendalara, Tarantum will join forces with Metapontum and Heraclea to go to war with Crotone at all costs." At the same time, he advised Melantius, "Since Crotone has occupied Thurii, washed away their shame and won great glory, then the next step is to lead the troops back to Crotone and restore peace to this land." Then, it was time for him to return to Crotone and restore peace to this land. Melantius, of course, could hear the threat in Archita's words, but his face was sullen and he did not respond. Of course, Melantius could hear the threat in Akita's words, but he kept a calm face and did not respond. At the foot of the mountain, he saw the ruins of the warehouse and hotel that had been burned to ashes and smoke was still billowing. He became nervous again. At the foot of the mountain, he saw the ruins of the warehouse and the hotel that had been burned to ashes and was still smoking. He became nervous again. As soon as he entered the city, the anger on the faces of the people reflected in his eyes. So, as soon as he saw the Devers, he expressed his condolences and concern for Armendalara and said frankly, "Devers, Tarantum has no intention of going to war with Crotone for now. I hope you can understand. Don't worry about it. Although we're furious at Crotone's actions, we can still restrain ourselves." Divers calmly replied, "Can a man bite back after being bitten by a dog?" Aketa didn't laugh. The calmer Divers appeared, the more uneasy he felt. After the annihilation of the Lucanian alliance, the soldiers of Tarantum were celebrating their victory. However, Divers and his men went back to the camp to sleep, saying that they wanted to recover their exhausted energy. The next day they told him, "We have retaken Amendalar." When Tarantum's envoy arrived at Crotone, the council in Crotone's city hall was in a heated discussion about the follow-up to the occupation of the city of Thurii. Conservatives such as General Lucius suggested, after plundering Thurii's wealth, they would support a puppet government that was close to Crotone and then retreat to avoid the dissatisfaction of the surrounding city-states. Radicals such as Chief General Myron, the same name as the famous Crotone athlete Myron from 100 years ago. Because this athlete was so legendary, he was regarded as the hero of Crotone, so many Crotone children were named Myron by their parents, believed that Thurii and Crotone had already formed a deep hatred and it would be difficult for the government they supported to retain power. Moreover, it was too close to Tarantum. If they kept the garrison, not only would it disperse the strength of Crotone, but it would also cause more hatred between the local people and Tarantum. The best way was to burn the city. Burn the city? The other generals and councillors were shocked. "That's right, burn the city," Myron said passionately. "Our ancestors defeated Sybaris and destroyed the city twice. The last time was when they dug the Krati River and used the flood to destroy the city of Sybaris. They made a name for themselves and shocked Greece, in exchange for the prosperity of Crotone and the hegemony of this area. However, since we were defeated by the allied forces of Rockley and Lygium a few decades ago, some city-states no longer respected us and secretly opposed us. We need to re-establish the dignity of Crotone. Now, a great opportunity is in front of us. This is a gift from the gods. If we miss it, we will be punished. Moreover, after destroying Thurii, the Sybaris plain will temporarily become unclaimed. We can recruit city-states that are on good terms with us from Greece or other places to build a new city on the Sybaris plain. Then, we can send some of our landless citizens over to become new immigrants to the new city. I believe the surrounding city-states will not be able to find fault with us, and the power of Crotone will expand to the north, increasing our strength." Myron's words were inspiring and practical. Most people in the council agreed with him. Thus, the messengers of Crotone soon arrived in Thurii. Melantius, who had nothing to do, was excited when he received the order from the Crotone city hall. He waved his hands and said, As the third general to destroy the city-states on the Sybaris plain, I will surely go down in history. He acted quickly. First, he asked the freedmen who sided with him to immediately build a pontoon bridge across the Krati River. The original pontoon bridge had been burned by the Turii. Then, he made up charges, claiming to punish the mastermind behind the killing of Crotone's messengers. In the end, the wealthy merchants of Turii were arrested, tortured, imprisoned, and even executed. All the wealth of their families was confiscated. Soon, the impatient Melantius felt that this method was too slow. He simply gave the order, "Plunder all the food and property in the city." In an instant, the whole city of Turii was filled with cries. The Turii people lying on the ground did not expect that a more terrible disaster would befall them soon. Armendolara's scouts, who were patrolling outside Turii, saw from afar the Crotone soldiers escorting the Turii people out of the city. Not long after, thick smoke rose from everywhere in the city, and soon it was set on fire. The scouts immediately reported to Leds. Leds was shocked when he heard the news. He quickly rowed across the Saraceno River to confirm it. By then, Turii had become a city of fire. The cries of the people outside the city shook the heavens. Soon, the Devers received the urgent news and were stunned. Crotone was destroying the city. They were retreating. Assists scolded the brutality of Crotone, while the Devers sat down and rubbed their chins, thinking about the significance of this major event for Armendolara. Then, the assists saw the Devers stand up again. They paced back and forth in the hall with a strange expression. When he saw that his vision was blurry, the Devers suddenly asked with a trembling voice, "If Crotone's army leaves now, where will they be by dusk?" The assists thought for a moment and said, "They won't be able to travel fast with so many supplies. They will probably reach Castellan by dusk." "Will Castellan let the army enter the city?" the Devers asked urgently. "Impossible. They just looted and burned the city of Turii." The Devers nodded. The assists had the same opinion as him. After pacing back and forth, he finally made up his mind and said, "Inform Leds to keep a close eye on the pontoon bridge over the Kladi River. At the same time, send Zam's scouts to follow the progress of Crotone's army. Where is the camp? How are we going to set it up? Give me all the details, but keep it hidden. Don't let Crotone find out. I want him to send someone to report to me at all times." "Yes," the assists answered excitedly. After following the Devers for so long, he knew that the Devers must be planning something big. The young assists could not help but ask excitedly, "Sir, are you going to attack Crotone's army?" "Whether we attack or not depends on whether Crotone gives us the chance." The Devers sneered. "Crotone owes so much blood, and he wants to go back easily? It won't be that easy. I believe that the impartial Hades will take care of us. It's time for us to show our fangs." The Devers sounded righteous, but there was another reason that made him make up his mind. The destruction of the city of Turii gave him a better chance than attacking Lucania. It was a chance for Amendola to grow stronger quickly, and this required him to take another big gamble. The Senate was called for an emergency meeting. When the Devers announced that the city of Turii had been burned, the elders were not surprised. They had already digested this shocking news before they came. However, the older citizens had mixed feelings. They used to hate the selfishness of the Turii for causing Amendola to suffer a heavy blow. However, when the worst retribution befell the Turii, they realized that they did not feel good. Instead, pity overwhelmed their hatred. But then, the Devers said with righteous indignation, "Crotone's crime must be punished. As an ally of Turii, we, Amendola, have the obligation to avenge the Turii people. Of course, we also need to tell Crotone that the Sybaris plain is not a place where they can come and go as they please. I announce that Amendola is mobilizing for war. Prepare to attack Crotone's army." As soon as he finished, the meeting was in an uproar. Chapter 145. Lord Consul, the Crotone have more men than us. If we attack recklessly, won't? Amyntas rebutted as soon as Cornelis said worriedly, "You don't understand war, so don't get involved." The Devers immediately scolded Amyntas and asked him to apologize. He then explained to Cornelis and the other old citizens, as the consul of Amyndolara, and as a leader who has been on the battlefield for a long time, I will cherish the lives of the citizens of Amyndolara. Without absolute confidence, I will not attack the powerful Crotone army recklessly. The Crotone occupied Turiae and obtained great glory and bountiful spoils of war, but we, Amyndolara, chose to retreat. They must be very proud, and their general, Melantius, is an even prouder man. These Crotone soldiers, who are loaded with spoils of war, will probably be thinking about how to go home and get their share of the loot on their way back. They will not have any desire to fight. They will probably be exhausted when they reach the campsite, and the defenses of the campsite will definitely be lacked. We will give them a heavy blow when they are asleep, just like when we took back Amyndolara. The Devers saw that Cornelis and the others were deep in thought, so he added, "Of course, if our spies discover that the defenses of the Crotone camp are very tight, the battle will have to be called off." Felicius emphasized, "Lord Consul's plan is indeed feasible." Antonio said, "We agree." At this time, Scambras, Tritodemos, and Plotsilus expressed their agreement first, and the attack plan was immediately approved. Immediately gather the citizens of the 4 brigades at the square. All brigade captains must pay attention and tell the soldiers not to make any noise, to keep quiet. I don't want the Crotone spies to discover anything unusual about us. The Devers calmly ordered, "My attack plan is—" Felicius and the elders who were appointed as the army officers received the order and left. Devers then said earnestly to Cornelis, "Turris has suffered such a disaster. As its ally, we should help its people. I want to set up a Turris Emergency Relief Committee, which you will be in charge of. It will provide food, accommodation, treatment, and other assistance to Turris." Cornelis only hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement. The other old citizens who hated the Turris remained silent, but Strompoli reminded them, "If we take food to save the Turris, I'm afraid we won't have enough to eat." "Don't worry," the Devers said confidently, "the Crotone stole so much food. When they defeat Melantius, they will have everything." He added in his mind, "Of course, they will also get more important things. I hope the Crotone are as unguarded as you said." Strompoli did not argue further because he too had hope in his heart. The Devers remembered that there was someone in the city who was very familiar with the Turris. He quickly asked, "By the way, how is Cunegurata's injury?" "He should be much better. I saw him in the temple yesterday. He walked down the mountain alone without the help of a slave," Scambras said. "Let him be your assistant. He is very familiar with the people and matters of Turris," the Devers said to Cornelis. "But he was—" Cornelis hesitated. "I think Turris is the mother state where he was born and raised. It is the place where he grew up and lived for decades. The harm that Turris did to him should not be as much as the worry and longing for Turris, especially after the city was burned down," the Devers said with certainty. Although they had only met a few times, in his impression, the old man, in fact, Cunegurata was only in his early 50s, had spent a lot of energy for the stability and prosperity of Turris in the past few years. He did not even hesitate to offend many people. He would not easily let Turris go. As expected, when Cunegurata heard that Turris was burned, he almost fainted from grief. When he received the notice from the Senate, he immediately rushed to Cornelis' house to discuss the matter of rescue. At that moment, the Devers summoned the leader of Lucania, Vespa, and his son, Bagul, in his house. "Tonight, we are going to attack Crotone's army. I hope you can join us. If we win, your 5-year service period will be halved." The Devers did not beat around the bush, and went straight to the point. "Attack Crotone's army? I heard there are more than 10,000 of them." Although Vespa was now a slave, his ears and eyes were not blocked. He was a little hesitant. "We will join," Bagul said before he could. "Son, you." Vespa panicked and was about to give his son a look. Bagul did not look at his father. Instead, he raised his head and said loudly, "We, the Lucanians, will join." Due to his old age and his identity as the leader, Vespa was only restricted to the city. He was not forced to serve. Bagul, on the other hand, had participated in many rugby matches and learned about the uniqueness of the citizen army. At the same time, he also learned about the magical young consul in front of him from his private conversations with the soldiers. He believed that since Amendola dared to attack, they must be confident of success. This was a good opportunity for their tribe. Good. Very good. Not only was the Devers happy for Bagul's agreement, but they were also excited to see the results of the assimilation policy so quickly. The Devers stepped forward and patted Bagul's shoulder. He said excitedly, "I believe this will be the right decision for you and your people." Bagul did not dodge. Vespa sighed softly. "What should we do next? Let your brother-in-law, Assists, tell you. He will be your adjutant, and you will be the leader of the Lucania army." The Devers looked behind them. Assists smiled shyly at the side. At noon, the Crotone army abandoned the thousands of Turin citizens outside the ruined city of Turin. They retreated with a large number of looted supplies, but they did not burn the pontoon bridge. When the news reached Amendola, the Devers, accompanied by priests, went to the temple of Zeus at the top of the mountain and sacrificed a bull. Amidst the chanting, he prayed to Zeus for this expedition. The priests blessed him and performed a divine divination. The Devers returned to the square and told the waiting citizens, "Zeus' prophecy is a good omen. We will win." Because of the military order, the unarmored militia did not cheer loudly, but they all looked excited and fanatical. The entire city of Amendola was on the move. Looking at the people driving oxen and horses loaded with food and supplies out of the city gate, the Devers inexplicably recalled the words Kaiser said in front of the Rubicon River in his previous life. The dice are cast. What happened that day was actually described in detail in the chapter, The Burning of Turin, by Ansitanos, who wrote the History of Magna Graecia more than 10 years later. That day the sky was dark and thick clouds hung low, as if the gods had shown an ominous sign from the beginning. The Crotone soldiers were not humans, they were bandits, beasts. They robbed everything that could be eaten, even the oatmeal in the bowls of children. They robbed everything of value, even the teeth in the people's mouth. Anyone who stepped forward to stop them was mercilessly trampled to the ground, and some even lost their lives. As for those who knelt on the ground and begged bitterly, they coldly ignored them. The desperate cries of the Turin people came from every house, and every street flowed with the blood and tears of the Turin people. What kind of sin did the Turin commit to provoke such a terrible demon? It should be said that Ansitanos' position in the History of Magna Graecia was basically neutral, but he invested so much emotion in this chapter that the Crotone people later protested, saying that Ansitanos had exaggerated the facts and was not conducive to the unity of the country, so they asked for the chapter to be deleted. Ansitanos refused, and the lawsuit went on for a long time. In the end, the Crotone soldiers drove the Turin people out of the city with spears and shields, then spread branches and hay in every corner of the city, and poured oil on them. The city of Turin began to burn. The Turin people watched helplessly as their homes were reduced to ashes in the fire, and the temples they worshipped collapsed. Did the gods abandon the Turin and let Hephaestos cast the flames of anger? After the Crotone people retreated, the Turin people ran madly into the Turin city, disregarding the thick smoke and flames that were still rising from the city. The scorching temperature steamed their flesh and blood, but they desperately rushed into the burning ashes, looking for anything useful. Without shelter, food, clothes, and money, how could the Turin survive in the Zbari plain that had become a wilderness? Just when they were in despair, the Amendolans appeared. Thousands of Amendolans brought hundreds of carts, half of which were hidden with weapons and equipment, and began to rescue the Turan people, setting up tents and digging camps. Cunagurata had completely forgotten what the Turan had done to him before. It was said that he had not fully recovered from the beating, but he ran around every corner to help all the Turan people in need. The governor of Amendolara, Cornelis, arranged manpower and distributed resources, organizing the rescue work in an orderly manner. Allow me to mention Devers at the end. He was the governor of Amendolara at that time, and also the hero who saved the city of Turan from the Lucanians. However, it was the first time the Turan people saw him, and they saw him in a difficult situation. In their eyes, this young man who looked like he had just become an adult was as kind as their child. He always wore a gentle smile, listening attentively to the people's pain and comforting the injured people with a gentle voice. He carried the crying children and wiped away their tears and dust. He helped the injured elderly and gave them soft bread. Under the leadership of Devers, the Amendolans treated the Turan people like family, doing their best to help the Turan people. The Devers saved the Turan people once again. The Turan people who had lost their homes did not suffer from hunger and disease. They were grateful to the Amendolans from the bottom of their hearts, and even more so to the hero Devers who had saved the Turan people twice. Chapter 146. Initially, Timurus saw that there were too many supplies and suggested to load some of the spoils of war onto the ships and ship them back to Crotone in advance. Melanchus refused. His reason was that Castellan and Cremissa had joined the Crotone alliance for the first time. We needed to show them the results of the conquest of Turan and the serious consequences of going against Crotone. In fact, he had another reason in his mind that he did not say it out loud. He was afraid that the supplies that were shipped back would be divided up by the people in the city hall. Then, his share of the wealth would be much smaller. As for why he did not burn the pontoon bridge, the Devers' worries were completely unnecessary. Melanchus did not take Amendolara seriously at all. He believed that with the destruction of Turan, the northern part of Greater Greece no longer had any power that could threaten Crotone. He kept the pontoon bridge for the convenience of the Crotones' migration to Sibari. The Crotones' march was more than 10 miles long. Most of them were loaded wagons, so the march was extremely slow. By dusk, the vanguard had just arrived at the city of Castellan. The people of Castellan were indeed afraid. Chief General Amicles led the city's higher-ups with smiles on their faces. They opened the city to welcome the victorious Melanchus and held a grand victory feast for him. At the same time, they invited the generals of Crotone. At the same time, they tactfully told Melanchus that the city of Castellan was too small to accommodate such a large army. Moreover, with so many supplies in the city, it would not be good if they were lost and there was a conflict. They also said that the city of Castellan had prepared a large amount of wine and food for the soldiers of Crotone to celebrate their victory and make up for Castellan's inability to let them into the city. Melanchus was not a man who could think for the soldiers. Seeing that the people of Castellan were so thoughtful, he readily agreed and led Timurus and a dozen other senior officers into the city with Amicles. On the way into the city, Melanchus heard a report from a spy. The people of Amandara rushed to the Zubari plain to rescue the Turii. He laughed and said, "Amendolara is wasting his time. We will be back soon. The Zubari plains can only belong to Crotone." When the Crotone soldiers heard that there was wine to drink and meat to eat, they immediately increased their marching speed. It was already late at night when they started to set up camp. After setting up their tents, they couldn't wait to start drinking and eating meat to celebrate their victory. It was not until late at night that their tired bodies couldn't resist the invasion of sleep and fell into a deep sleep. Ansitanos didn't mention in his book that the citizens of Amendolan went against their usual training habits. They roughly pitched their tents and built a simple camp before going to bed. In fact, most of the people who helped the tourists in the afternoon were the women, teenagers, and the elderly of Amandara. For this battle, the entire city of Amendolara was mobilized. That night, the Devers did not allow the tourists to enter the newly built camp. The exhausted tourists fell into a deep sleep under the canopy. At the same time, the Amendolan militia in the camp were woken up by their officers one by one. They quietly ate the freshly baked bread and drank hot mutton soup with a little lamb and cheese in their sleepy eyes. Although they had already eaten dinner a few hours ago, this food would provide them with more protein and calories for the long march and slaughter that was to come. Then, they put on the breastplates and greaves they took out from the pack carts, checked their bayonets, knives, and shield. At that moment, a few torches were set up in an open space in the middle of the camp. The Devers and the captains, company captains, and sub-captains were carefully observing the terrain model of Crotone's camp that was made out of mud. Melanchus is quite cautious. He let his troops cross the Trionto River and set up camp in the south of Castellan. He thought they would be safe with Castellan in the way, but that just made his soldiers more relaxed. The Devers used a wooden stick to point at the Trionto River model that separated Castellan and Crotone's camp. But Isam and his men have repeatedly tried different sections of the river. He said that one section of the river is completely walkable because it's in the middle of the river, far from Crotone's camp, so they won't be discovered. He also sent someone to report that the Crotone have been drinking and partying in the camp all night. I believe that when we attack tomorrow, they will still be sleeping like pigs. The Devers' words made everyone chuckle knowingly. They didn't dig trenches, set up fences, or set up stables. I'm afraid there won't even be any sentries tomorrow morning. Do they think they're taking a stroll in their own backyard? So easy. The officers listened to the Devers' explanation. Not only did they not find it funny, they were enraged. They secretly swore that they would not let these arrogant Crotone people go. The only problem is that their tents are very scattered and spaced far apart. The southern part of the tents protrudes outwards because the supplies they looted are all concentrated here. The Devers drew a large circle on the camp model with a wooden stick and said cautiously, "Our militia and the Lucanian brigade led by Bagul only have about 5,000 men. Artenis sent people to the eastern Mediterranean to recruit about 500 freemen from Thrace, Rhodes and Crete, making the 7th Brigade more complete. In order to completely surround Crotone's camp, our attack formation can only have a single row of soldiers. Don't worry, Commander, one row is enough. It's more troublesome to deal with people, but it's easy to deal with a bunch of sleeping pigs." Aminta's words made everyone cover their mouths and chuckle again. The Devers smiled and said to Capus, who was next to him, "I'll leave the south of the camp to your 1st Brigade. You'll attack first. As the south area is larger, and there are many pack carts and supplies blocking the way, you and your subordinates will discuss how to solve these problems. I only have one request. Whether or not the 1st Brigade can become the first in the army depends on whether you can keep up with the attack speed of the other brigades, or even be faster than them." The usually calm Capus was also excited at this moment. "Rest assured, Commander, the 1st Brigade will not let you down." The Devers nodded and turned to Drax. "The 2nd Brigade will go to the east of the camp. After the 1st Brigade attacks, you can start the attack. The east of the camp is close to the city of Castellan. When the enemy is attacked and panicked, the first thing they will think of is to escape into the city, so you have to use the fiercest attack to make them give up on this idea." Drax looked at Capus and said, "Commander, the 2nd Brigade will use our actions to prove that we are not inferior to the 1st Brigade." "Good, you have to have this kind of confidence," the Devers praised, then turned to Hieronymus. "The 3rd Brigade will attack from the west. Although most of you are new recruits, I believe that the 3rd Brigade will perform well." Hieronymus clenched his fists and said, "Don't worry, Epicthenes." "Yes. You and Xpit will lead the light shield men of the 7th Brigade and attack from the north." "Commander, aren't we lacking in numbers?" Epicthenes immediately asked. "Don't worry. Is Bagul here?" the Devers asked. "I'm here," Bagul said from the back of the crowd. Come to the front. The Devers beckoned him closer, then said in a deep voice, You will lead the Lucanian brigade and join the attack from the north. Epicthenes will be the commander. Bagul looked hesitantly at Epicthenes, who gave him a friendly smile. He lowered his head and said, All right. The light shield men are good at close combat, and the charge of the Lucanian warriors is also very powerful. The enemy might not even consider escaping to the north at first because of the Triontu River. I'm not worried about your attack. I'm only worried about your lack of teamwork and that there will be gaps in your advance. So, when you come down, you must discuss how to improve your teamwork and control the rhythm of the attack. There's something more important. Divers emphasized his tone and said solemnly, Bagul, I've already told you before, and I'll emphasize it again. Before the battle, no matter if you're marching or hiding, you must maintain silence. You must not alarm the enemy. You must warn your tribesmen to watch their mouth. If anyone disobeys orders and affects this operation, they will be executed according to the Amendola military law. Got it? Bagul was secretly shocked. He decided to go back and discuss with the assists how to prevent his people from making mistakes. Commander, are our archers and catapults not participating in the operation? Alpines asked anxiously when he saw that there was no place for him in the attack plan. Of course you'll be there. The Devers smiled. Alpines, lead the archers and catapults to the east of the camp and set up an ambush on the road leading to Castellan City. Once someone comes out of the city to help, deal the most damage to them. Yes, Commander. According to Isam's intelligence, the Crotone soldiers in Castellan are celebrating the victory at the camp, so they didn't return to the city. There shouldn't be many soldiers in the city who can participate in the battle, and they shouldn't be strong either. Oh, and the Crotone generals who are having fun in the city. I bet their legs will be weak by tomorrow morning, and they won't be able to hold their weapons, the Devers said.